Number 3. Sylvester Matuska. On New Year's Eve 1930, railroad workers who were about 20 miles outside of Vienna, Austria, noticed that a section of train tracks had been destroyed. They knew that the Vienna-Passau train was coming. Luckily, they were able to warn the engineer, and he stopped the train a couple feet from the wrecked section of the track. The police were called in, and they concluded that someone intentionally destroyed the tracks. They thought that someone had blown it up with dynamite. Unfortunately, they did not find any clues to the identity of the bomber. A month later, a different section of the same rail line was destroyed with dynamite, and a train was heading towards the destroyed section. But once again, workers found the wrecked track before the train made it there, and they were able to warn the engineer, who was able to stop in time. The police were confident that the same person was responsible for both bombings, but his identity continued to elude them. 7 months later, on August 8, 1931, a passenger train that was heading from Basel, Switzerland to Berlin, Germany, was derailed a short distance from Berlin. Some dynamite had exploded under the train, and it caused several cars to plunge over a 30-foot cliff. Over 100 people were injured. Some of the injuries were serious, but no one lost their life. The police discovered that the dynamite had been connected to a fuse wire that led to some bushes beside the tracks. The police theorized that the bomber hid in the bushes and then lit the fuse as the train approached. After the derailment, people were in a panic, and the police in multiple countries wanted the bomber arrested. The German police offered up a reward of 100,000 Reichsmark, which is about $267,000 US dollars, in 2019. But in the weeks after the bombing, no arrests were made. Just over a month after the derailment, on September 13, 1931, a passenger train was heading from Budapest, Hungary to Vienna, Austria. What the train's engineer didn't know was that part of a bridge along the route had been blown up with dynamite. When the train reached the destroyed part of the bridge, the engine car and 9 of the 11 passenger cars crashed into the ravine below the bridge. 25 people were killed and another 120 were injured, 17 of them seriously injured. After the crash, the Budapest Ministry of Railroads was dealing with claims from passengers and families of passengers. One clerk noticed something unusual about one of the claims. It was submitted by a man named Sylvester Matuska. Matuska's claim said that his luggage was lost and he had suffered facial injuries. What the clerk thought was odd was that Matuska claimed he was in the first car. The clerk knew that no one in the first car survived the crash. So the clerk handed over Matuska's claim to the police. The police investigated Matuska. He was 39 years old, he was married, and he and his wife had a 13-year-old daughter. He was Hungarian, and he owned businesses in Germany and Austria. The details of his life before the derailments is unclear. It's believed that he was trained as a mechanical engineer. It's thought that he served in the Hungarian army in World War I in a unit that was responsible for sabotaging railways. After the war, he worked as a miner, and he eventually bought his own stone quarry. A search of his family's home in Vienna was conducted. The police found explosives and plans for future bombings. Matuska was arrested, and for 2 weeks he claimed he was innocent. But then after 2 weeks, he confessed to being the saboteur. He supposedly said, "I wreck trains because I like to see people die. I like to hear them scream. I like to see them suffer." He also supposedly admitted to being sexually aroused by the crashes, and he even had an orgasm because of the last derailment. There was also some speculation that Matuska's crimes were politically motivated. Near the derailment site that was outside Berlin, a Nazi newspaper that had been defaced was found. There were also rumors that Matuska was a communist. But Matuska never talked publicly about politics. Matuska first went to trial in Vienna for the 2 failed derailments. He was found guilty and he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He was then transferred to Budapest, where he went to trial for mass murder. At his trial, Matuska testified in his own defense. He said that at the time of the bombings, he was under the influence of a spirit called Leo. He also said that he enjoyed himself during the derailments. He said that after the last derailment, he cut his face with a pocket knife and then stood around with the survivors. He admitted that he got a sense of pleasure from this. Matuska was found guilty and he was sentenced to death. His sentence was later commuted to life. He was incarcerated in a prison in Vac, which is a town in northern Hungary. In 1944, nearly 13 years after Matuska was arrested, he managed to escape from prison. How he escaped and where he went after he escaped are shrouded in mystery. Part of the problem was that when he escaped, World War II was raging and places like Hungary were in chaos. In 1944, Soviet forces were starting to push German forces out of Hungary. One theory regarding Matuska's escape is that the Russian NKVD, which later became the KGB, arranged his escape. The theory goes that in exchange for freeing him, Matuska worked for the Russians. He was tasked with sabotaging railways in Hungary that were being used by the Germans. There is another rumor that Matuska was a Soviet agent the entire time and he had been placed in Hungary before the derailments. Another rumor is that after World War II, he worked for the Chinese during the Korean War. He was even supposedly captured in Korea by American forces. There is yet another theory that he lived out the rest of his life in Hungary under a false name. But there is no evidence to prove or disprove any of these theories. It's a complete mystery as to what happened to Sylvester Matuska after he escaped from prison. It's as if he vanished into thin air. It's been 75 years since he escaped from prison, so it seems unlikely that we will ever know what happened to him. Number 2. Larry Woods Jr. In May 1993, 29-year-old Laura Botts was working as a manager at the Black Eyed Pea restaurant in Indianapolis, Indiana. Laura and her husband Kirk had moved to Indianapolis from Houston, Texas, a year earlier. They wanted to raise their 2 sons, who were 3 years old and 15 months old, in the Midwest, where Kirk grew up. Laura and Kirk had been married for 4 years. They had met at a Black Eyed Pea restaurant in Houston. Laura was a server, and Kirk worked at a company that was near the restaurant, so he often came in for lunch and dinner. He and Laura started talking, and this led to them dating. They were married not long afterward. On the morning of May 13th, 1993, Laura was working the morning shift at the restaurant. 4 employees showed up just after 7 o'clock, and they found the restaurant locked. The district manager arrived not long afterward, and he opened up the restaurant. In the office, they found the dead body of 29-year-old Laura Botts. She had been shot once in the head and once in the back. About $2,400 was missing from the restaurant safe. In the days after the murder, the police had a suspect. It was a 20-year-old man named Larry Woods Jr. Woods had worked at the restaurant, but he had recently been fired. He was supposed to pick up his last paycheck at 7 a.m. on the morning of the murder, which meant that he was supposed to be at the restaurant around the time that Laura was shot. Also, Woods' fiancée and her brother went to the police and told them that Woods had confessed to killing Laura. Woods was arrested, and he went to trial a year after the murder in May 1994. Woods claimed he was innocent. He said that when he arrived at the restaurant to pick up his last paycheck, he found Laura dead. He panicked and ran away. At the trial, the pathologist who conducted Laura's autopsy testified. On the stand, he started talking about something he wasn't supposed to talk about. He told the court that Laura was 6 weeks pregnant when she was killed. The judge ended up declaring a mistrial. Woods went to trial again months later in August 1994. At this trial, Woods' lawyer pointed out that there was no physical evidence that tied him to the crime. For example, the murder weapon was never found, and none of the money from the robbery was ever recovered. His lawyer also pointed out that other people were at the restaurant that morning. At around 7 a.m., a delivery man dropped off vegetables. But nevertheless, after 3.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Woods guilty. At Woods' sentencing hearing, the prosecution brought up his criminal history. In June 1990, when Woods was 17, he went to a restaurant where he used to work early in the morning before it opened. The only person in the restaurant was the manager. Woods was able to convince the manager to let him inside. Once he was inside, he pulled out a handgun and he forced the manager to get the money out of the safe. After getting the money, Woods stepped into a hallway to see if the coast was clear, but he kept his gun aimed at the manager. The manager was sure that Woods was going to shoot him, so he slammed the hallway door shut and locked it, and then triggered the restaurant security alarm. Woods was arrested a short time later. Since Woods was a juvenile, he did not do any serious jail time. The prosecutor pointed out that the two crimes were nearly identical. The difference was that this time, the manager ended up dead. The prosecutor argued that Woods decided to kill Laura to eliminate the witness because last time he was arrested because the manager triggered the alarm and identified him as the robber. The judge ended up sentencing Woods to 110 years in prison. He was sent to the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City to serve his sentence. On July 9, 2001, at 11:30 a.m., the prison did a routine head count and they noticed that one inmate was missing. That inmate was Larry Woods Jr. The prison staff looked around the grounds of the prison because initially they thought he was hiding somewhere. But they found no evidence that he was hiding anywhere on the grounds. Then the prison staff realized that a garbage truck had been on the grounds that morning. They thought that Woods may have gotten away from the prison grounds by hiding in the back of the garbage truck. But if he did that, he probably never made it off the prison grounds alive. Part of the prison's regulations is that before the garbage truck leaves the prison grounds, the garbage has to be compacted. The authorities checked the garbage truck's records, and the compressor was activated at 8:40 a.m., which was just before the truck left the prison grounds. If Woods was in the back of the truck when that happened, he most likely would have been crushed to death. The compactor crushed garbage at a ratio of 4-to-1. That means that there were 4 garbage bags that were full. They would have been crushed to the size of 1 garbage bag. The police searched the garbage dump for Woods' body, but they found no trace of him. Also, they did not find any evidence that he was crushed to death in the back of the truck. But they did have a possible sighting of him outside of the prison. The Department of Corrections received a tip that Williams had a girlfriend who lived in an apartment complex near the prison. A maintenance man who worked at the apartment complex was questioned, and he was shown a photo of Woods. The maintenance man said that he talked to a man who looked like Woods at 11 o'clock and then again at 11:30 on the morning that Woods vanished from the prison. This would have fit the timeline of Woods' escape. He was first noted missing at around 11:30 a.m. But besides the maintenance man's sighting, no other trace of Woods was found in the apartment complex. In fact, no trace of Woods has been found since he disappeared from the prison. If Larry Woods Jr. is alive today, he would be 47 years old. He may be living in the South, possibly in College Park, Georgia. Some other possibilities is that he is living in Chicago, Illinois, or in Ohio, possibly in Cleveland or Youngstown. Authorities even think it's possible he's living in Michigan City, Indiana, which is where the prison he escaped from is located. According to the television program, America's Most Wanted, Woods was a member of the Chicago-based street gang, the Gangster Disciples, so it's believed he has gang tattoos. He might have several on his chest, including a number 9 and the phrase "Until Death Do Us Part" on his upper left chest. Just above his heart could be the word Elwood. On the opposite side of his chest, he might have the words Pooh Birdie. Other tattoos he might have on his chest are the phrases Lil Larry R.I.P., Love's Only Always Forever, and Plenty Much Love. He may also have tattoos of the date 6499 and the number 10. Woods also has several scars. He has scars on his lower right arm, his stomach, and his upper back. Woods is approximately 5'10", and when he escaped, he weighed 190 pounds. Since Larry Woods Jr. only served 7 years of his 110-year sentence, if he's still alive, Laura Bott's family is hoping he'll be arrested one day soon and he'll live out the rest of his life behind bars. Number 1. Glenn Stark Chambers. In early 1975, Glenn Stark Chambers, who lived in Sarasota, Florida, was 23 years old. He was living with his girlfriend, 22-year-old Colleen Weeks, and her toddler son. Chambers was abusive, and on January 22, 1975, Weeks moved out of their apartment. Chambers did not take it well. Chambers went to Weeks' place of employment, which was a bowling alley, and he waited for her to show up for her shift. After Weeks parked her car, Chambers yanked her out of the car and started beating her. A lot of people saw the assault, including an off-duty police officer. The officer tried to stop Chambers, and Chambers started beating him up. The officer called for backup, and eventually, Chambers was subdued and arrested. 3 hours later, Weeks bailed Chambers out of jail, and they went home. 2 hours after he got out of jail, Chambers brought Weeks to the emergency room. 22-year-old Colleen Weeks was not conscious, and she was in bad shape. Half of her hair had been pulled out, and her face was covered with cuts and bruises. The doctors determined that her brainstem had been severed. Chambers told the hospital staff that Weeks had fallen while she was getting out of the bathtub. The hospital staff did not believe him, and the police were called. Chambers was arrested in the parking lot of the hospital. Woods remained in a coma for 5 days, and then she died. Chambers went to trial for first-degree murder months later, in May 1975. At the trial, Chambers testified in his own defense. He claimed that he and Weeks had a sadomasochistic relationship and that she had agreed to be beaten. He said he never meant to kill her. He also said that at the time he was drunk and he was high on a drug he called Gorilla Biscuits. Gorilla Biscuits is a slang term for Quaaludes. They got the nickname Gorilla Biscuits because sometimes users become violent. The prosecution presented evidence that Chambers had been an abusive partner and he killed Weeks on the day she moved out. The jury ended up finding Chambers guilty of first-degree murder. Several months later, on July 10, 1975, he was sentenced to die in the electric chair. After the sentencing hearing, Chambers was being held in the Sarasota County Jail. 3 days after he was sentenced to die, Chambers and 2 other inmates overpowered a guard, and using bed sheets that were tied together, they climbed out of a 3rd-story window and ran away from the jail. The other 2 inmates were caught within hours. Chambers was recaptured after 3 days. He had been hiding out in an abandoned mine. Over a year later, in November 1976, the Florida Supreme Court overturned Chambers' death sentence. He was then sentenced to life in prison. After that, Chambers became a model prisoner. It turned out that Chambers was a brilliant man. While he was in prison, he joined Mensa, which is a society for people with high IQs. It's also believed that he learned to speak Spanish while he was in prison. In 1985, Chambers was transferred to Polk Correctional Institution in Polk City, Florida. In December 1990, Chambers was a participant in Pride Enterprises, which is a program that has inmates build office equipment and furniture for government agencies. On December 21, 1990, a truck came to pick up some furniture from the prison. After the truck was loaded, the driver drove to Daytona Beach, which is about 100 miles from the prison. When he reached his destination, he went into the back of the truck and he found something that surprised him. It was the uniform of a prison inmate. He then got in contact with the authorities at the prison. They did a head count, and they realized that Chambers was missing. After the news that Chambers' escape was made public, the prison supervisor told a local newspaper he'll turn up eventually. They'd all come back, that is, Most of them turn up. The truck was examined, and they found tools inside of it. They realized that Chambers used the tools to loosen a slat on the truck's roll-up door, and then he climbed out. After he got out of the back of the truck, he was able to put the slat back in place so it didn't look like there was anything wrong with the door. The authorities think that Chambers got out of the truck while the truck was on Interstate 4 near Kissimmee, Florida. The truck had come to a stop there because there was a traffic jam. The police investigate Chambers' escape, and they do not think that Chambers had any help from anyone inside the prison. But they do think he had help from someone on the outside. But as to who may have helped him is a mystery. It's also a mystery as to where Chambers went after he got out of the truck. The authorities think it's possible that he may have slipped into South America. They also said that it's entirely possible that after going to South America, he came back to the United States with a new identity. The authorities have also looked for him in Canada, but they have not found any evidence that he was ever there. Chambers' story has been featured on America's Most Wanted several times. After his segments aired, the show received reports of possible sightings. People said that he was working at construction sites in Alabama and in the Gulf Coast of Florida. The authorities have checked out these tips, but they have never found any physical evidence that Chambers was ever in these areas. If Glenn Stark Chambers is alive today, he is 68 years old. He is 6'3", and when he escaped, he weighed just over 200 pounds. His hair is most likely gray, and he has blue eyes. He has two 3-inch scars on his right forearm. He also has a tattoo, which he got in prison. It's on his left upper arm, and it says, "Live free or die." Glenn Stark Chambers has been on the lam for nearly 30 years, which is twice the amount of time he served in prison. Colleen Weeks' family hopes that one day soon he'll be recaptured. Number 3. John Kelly Gentry. On September 1st, 1982, 29-year-old John Kelly Gentry was sentenced to 6 months in jail for assault. He was sent to the Lucas County Jail in Toledo, Ohio to serve his sentence. While he was serving his time, he met 25-year-old Barbara Gerber, who was the kitchen manager at the jail. One day they started talking, and Gentry explained that he was in prison for assault. He told her that he had beat up a guy while defending a woman at a bar. Gerber was impressed with Gentry's story, and she started to develop feelings for him. The problem with Gentry's story is that besides serving time for assault, everything else he said was a lie. Gentry had gotten into a fight with his gay live-in lover, and Gentry ended up crushing the man's windpipe. The man was nearly killed in the assault. When Gentry was released from prison in March 1982, he and Gerber started dating. For a few weeks, everything seemed to be going fine. Then on April 12, 1983, Gerber's brother went to her home in Summerfield Township, Michigan. When he walked into her home, he smelled gas. He went to the kitchen and noticed that the gas stove had been left on. Even stranger, there was a lit candle near the stove. He then went to the bedroom and he found his 25-year-old sister dead. She had been sexually assaulted, stabbed, and her throat was slashed. The killer left the gas stove on and lit the candle in the hopes that it would cause an explosion, which would either destroy or greatly damage the crime scene. Some money and some jewelry was missing from her home. Also, her car was missing. Gentry became the prime suspect, but he was nowhere to be found. A few days later, Gerber's car was found nearly 225 miles away from her home in Toledo, Ohio. The police then asked around Toledo's gay community if anyone had seen Gentry. Someone told them that Gentry was living with 52-year-old William Veith, who owned a coin store. The police went to Veith's home, but there was no answer. Then they went to Veith's store and found it locked. It looked like it had been days since anyone was there. The police got inside the store and they went into the basement. There they found the body of 52-year-old William Veith. He had been beaten with the blunt side of an axe. He was most likely killed within 24 hours of Barbara Gerber being killed. Some coins and jewelry were missing, as was Veith's car. The police concluded that Gentry was dating both Veith and Gerber at the same time. When he left one of their homes, he drove to the other lover's home to stay for a few days. The police think that either Gerber or Veith found out that he was having an affair, so he killed them both and stole some of their valuables. Veith's car was found a few days later in South Bend, Indiana. After abandoning the car, Gentry traveled to California. On May 1, 1983, about 3 weeks after the murders, Gentry mailed a postcard to a friend. The postmark was San Diego. Then 6 days later, he sent a postcard to his father. This time, the postmark was Los Angeles. 5 years later, Gentry still hadn't been found, and a nationwide murder warrant was released for him. The police think that Los Angeles is where Gentry ended up, and that's where they believe he's been hiding for the last 35 years. They think he lived in West Hollywood and went by his middle name, Kelly. He may have, or he may still be, disguised as a woman. The police think that after killing his 2 lovers in less than 24 hours, Gentry started living a law-abiding life. The police have his fingerprints on record, and had he been arrested in the years since he went missing, his fingerprints would have been matched to those on file, and he would have been arrested on the murder warrant. Another possibility is that Gentry is dead, and has been dead for years, if not decades. In 2016, the police released age-enhanced photographs of Gentry, but they didn't generate any leads. Until it's confirmed that John Kelly Gentry is dead, a warrant will remain active for the murders of Barbara Gerber and William Veith. If he is still alive, at the time of this video, he would be 70 years old. Number 2. Robert William Fisher. Robert William Fisher was born in April 1961 in Brooklyn, New York, and at some point in his childhood, he moved to Tucson, Arizona. When Robert was 15, his parents went through a bitter divorce, and he was emotionally scarred from it. After he graduated from high school, he enlisted in the Navy. He was discharged in 1982, and then he became a firefighter for San Diego County. Not long afterward, he met Mary Jean Cooper at a church function. They married in 1987, and they moved into a house in Scottsdale, Arizona. A year into the marriage, Mary gave birth to a daughter named Brittany. 3 years later, she gave birth to a son named Robert, but he went by the name Bobby. By all appearances, the family seemed typical. They were active in their church, and the children played team sports. When the kids were in school full-time, Mary worked part-time for a small medical company and volunteered at the children's school. After he and Mary wed, Robert returned to school and got his degree. After graduating, he got a job at the Mayo Clinic as a respiratory therapist. Robert was also an avid outdoorsman. He loved to fish, hunt, camp, and ride quads. As his son Bobby grew up, he also developed a love for the outdoors. April 11, 2001 was a mild but sunny day in Scottsdale. It was a typically busy day for the Fisher family. Brittany and Bobby attended school, and Robert worked at the Mayo Clinic. After he finished work, Robert took Brittany to an induction ceremony for the National Junior Honor Society. At the ceremony, people noticed Robert acting oddly. He was impatient, and he made Brittany leave before getting her certificate. While the father and daughter were at the ceremony, Mary was at a gun safety class with Bobby. Later that night, sometime between 9:30 and 10:15, a neighbor heard Robert and Mary get into an argument. 10 hours later, the neighborhood was rocked by an explosion. The Fisher's house had burst into flames. The explosion rattled the windows of the houses within a half a mile. The fire burned the Fisher's house to rubble. In the rubble, the fire department found 3 bodies that were barely recognizable as bodies. They were 38-year-old Mary and her 2 children, 12-year-old Brittany and 9-year-old Bobby. When the house exploded, they were all in their beds. The medical examiner determined that they had been killed before the house exploded. All 3 had their throats slit from ear to ear. Mary had been shot once in the back of the head. Then the killer cut the gas line and lit a candle. Hours later, this caused the house to explode. Robert's body was not found in the house. At first, the police and the victims' families weren't sure if Robert was a victim or the killer. When Robert didn't turn up alive or dead, the police began to investigate his life. It turned out that just before the murders, Robert and Mary's marriage was coming to an end. Robert wasn't physically abusive, but he was a control freak who would humiliate his wife to control her. Also, Robert had 2 extramarital affairs. One of the women was a sex worker. Mary was the one who wanted the divorce. Robert, who was deeply scarred by his own parents' divorce, did not want to get divorced. He told a friend that divorce was not an option. A few things were missing from the family's house after the explosion. This included some of Robert's clothes, his .38 caliber handgun, the family's dog, Blue, and Mary's Toyota 4Runner. The police looked at Robert's financial records, and they discovered that at 10:43 on the night of the murders, Robert used a Wells Fargo ATM. He withdrew the daily maximum, which was $280. A week after the house exploded, the 4Runner was found. It was located about 100 miles from the family's home in the Tonto National Forest. The area was one of Robert's favorite places to go hunting. The police also found the family's dog, which was still alive. But once again, there was no trace of Robert. They searched the area and brought in cadaver dogs. Robert was nowhere to be found. Where he went after he abandoned the vehicle is a mystery. Some people believe that he killed himself, possibly in one of the caves in the forest, and his body just hasn't been found. However, the police and the FBI do not think that is what happened. Since Robert was a physically fit outdoorsman, he would have been able to survive for a while in the wilderness. They also think he is too egocentric to kill himself. 13 months after the murders, Robert William Fisher still had not been found. He was then placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. For the past 16 years, he's remained on the list. Over the years, there have been over 300 confirmed sightings of him. Fisher has several unique physical features. Notably, he has scars on his back from having surgery after suffering a back injury. Because of his back injury, he walks in an exaggerated erect way with his chest pushed out. One other notable feature is that he has a gold crown on his upper left first bicuspid tooth. Several authorities think that he may be working at a menial job somewhere. He has links to Florida and New Mexico. The police, the FBI, and even Mary's parents think it's possible that he has a new family, and they probably have no idea that he slit the throats of his last family. If Robert William Fisher is still alive, then he is 57 years old. There is currently a $100,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. He is considered armed and extremely dangerous. Number 1. Antonio Anglez. On the night November 13th, 1992, there was a high school party at a nightclub called The Cooler in the town of Picassent, which is just outside Valencia, Spain. 14-year-old Miriam Garcia Iborra, 15-year-old Antonio Gomez Rodriguez, and 14-year-old Desiree Hernandez Folch, who all lived in the nearby town of Alcácer, decided to attend the party. The problem was they couldn't get a ride to the nightclub, so they decided to hitchhike. They were picked up by a couple who dropped them off at a gas station not far from the club. Even though the girls could have walked to the club from the gas station, the couple saw them get into a car that had at least 2 men in it. The gas station was poorly lit, so they couldn't be certain, but the couple thought that the car was a white Corsa Opel. Sadly, the girls never made it to the nightclub, and they didn't come home either. Their parents reported them missing, and the Civil Guard immediately launched a massive investigation into the disappearances. A few weeks later, the girls still had not been found, so the Interior Minister of Spain set up a special task force. By Christmas, no trace of the girls had been found. That's when the President of Spain met with the families, and he promised that more resources would be put into finding the young women. However, despite the efforts of the Spanish authorities, the girls weren't found dead or alive. Then just 2.5 months after the girls went missing, about 95 miles away from where they were last seen, in a remote area in the town of La Romana, 2 beekeepers found what they thought was the dead body of a man. It turned out to be the bodies of Miriam, Antonia, and Desiree. They had all been shot to death. Their bodies were in a large hole that someone had dug, but they weren't buried. Instead, the bodies were wrapped in a rug, and the branches and shrubs were thrown over the rug to hide the bodies. There was no evidence that indicated that the girls were killed where they were found, and they were most likely just dumped there. In the area around the hole, and in the hole itself, there was a bunch of garbage. Among the garbage, they found a pamphlet from a hospital that had the name Enrique Anglez printed on it. Enrique lived in Cataroja, another small town outside of Valencia. The Civil Guard didn't know Enrique, but they were very familiar with his brother, Antonio. Antonio was a drug dealer who had been arrested 5 times. In 1991, a year before the girls went missing, he was convicted of kidnapping. The victim was his girlfriend, who was a heroin addict. She had stolen a bag of heroin from him, so he took her to his family's home, where his mother and his siblings were living, and handcuffed her to a pole. Over the course of 25 hours, Antonio beat and tortured his girlfriend. One of Antonio's brothers finally called the Civil Guard, and they came and arrested Antonio. His girlfriend survived the ordeal. Antonio received a sentence of 6 years in prison for the kidnapping conviction. But then in March 1992, not even a year into his sentence, he was given a 6-day leave from prison. At the end of the 6-day leave, he didn't return to prison, and the prison officials didn't make any attempts to track him down. When the 3 girls were kidnapped and killed, the Civil Guard had no idea where Antonio was. Even after the bodies were found, they still didn't know where he was. Since the civil guard couldn't interview Antonio, they focused their attention on one of his best friends, Miguel Ricard. For several years, Ricard had lived with Antonio's family. Ricard was charged, but not convicted, of helping Antonio kidnap his girlfriend. Ricard also owned a white Corsa Opel. Ricard was arrested the day after the bodies were found at the Anglais house. While he was sitting in jail, 6 medical examiners conducted autopsies on the girls. When the bodies were found, 2 of their heads were detached. It's unclear if they were decapitated or the heads detached as the bodies decomposed. 2 of the girls had been raped both vaginally and anally, and the 3rd girl had probably only been raped anally. Desiree's nipples had been removed. It appears that they were torn off with something like pliers. It also appeared that she had been stabbed in addition to being shot. Miriam's body showed signs that she had been beaten. Several of her teeth were missing. Also missing was her right hand. Her right hand has never been found. She had also been sexually mutilated after death. The day after he was arrested, Miguel Ricard confessed to taking part in the kidnapping of the girls. He said that Antonio was the mastermind and the one who killed the girls. He then signed the confession. The problem is that his confession didn't make any sense. He said that the girls sat peacefully in the back seat of the car as they drove them 95 miles away from their home. The car ride would have lasted a few hours, but apparently the girls didn't scream or put up a fight. When they got to La Romana, Ricard said that he went off and had sex with one of the girls, and Antonio went off with the other 2. But out of nowhere, Antonio shot all 3 girls. They grabbed a rug and wrapped the bodies in it. Then they dumped the bodies in the hole that they had dug. One of the biggest problems with this story was that Antonio had not been seen since he left prison on a 6-day leave, about 8 months before the girls went missing. Without any evidence to back it up, the civil guard concluded that after leaving prison, Antonio moved back home and he had been living with his family the entire time. They also think that when Ricard was arrested at the family's home, Antonio was in the house. They think he was hiding in a bedroom on the 4th floor of the building. The civil guard believes that when they arrested Ricard, Antonio jumped out of a 4th-story window onto an adjacent building and ran off. Not long after Ricard was arrested, the civil guard got a tip that Antonio had been seen at a hairdresser getting his hair bleached. But after that, they lost track of him. As Ricard sat in prison, his confession continued to evolve. The changes in his story always came after the civil guard confronted him with new details from the medical examiners or the crime scene. By the time that Ricard went to trial, in May 1997, about 4 years after the bodies were found, Ricard had confessed 3 different times. All the confessions contained different details. None of his confessions were audibly recorded or videotaped. Ricard said that he was coerced into confessing and he was innocent. The prosecution said that since Ricard confessed 3 times and he signed each confession, this proved he was guilty. The prosecution's case was that on the night the girls went missing, Antonio and Ricard picked them up in Ricard's Corsa Opel. As they drove by the club, the girls started to protest, so Antonio hit Miriam with the butt of his gun, and this knocked out some of her teeth. They drove to La Romana, and then took the girls to an abandoned house that Antonio had supposedly used for drug deals. First, they sexually assaulted 2 of the girls, and then they went and got food from a nearby town. They returned a couple hours later and started sexually assaulting and torturing the 3rd girl. Afterward, they bound the girls and then fell asleep. They woke up the next morning, made the girls walk out to the pit that they had dug, and then shot them. Miguel Ricard was found guilty, and he was sentenced to 170 years in prison. But not everyone was satisfied with the verdict. Even some family members of the victims weren't convinced that the civil guard and the prosecution got the case right. That's because there are several glaring problems with the theory that Ricard and Antonio kidnapped and killed the girls. Throughout the investigation, both the medical examiners and the civil guard made several major mistakes. After the 6 medical examiners conducted the first set of autopsies, a second set of autopsies was performed by another medical examiner. The medical examiner who performed the second set of autopsies wrote a report blasting the medical examiners who conducted the first set of autopsies. One of the worst things they did was wash all 3 girls' bodies before they were examined. The medical examiner who performed the second set of autopsies said that an untold amount of evidence was washed away when they did this. The civil guard was also reckless in their investigation. For example, when they collected evidence from the crime scene, they put wet and damp evidence in sealed plastic bags. The correct procedure for collecting damp and wet evidence is to put it in an unsealed bag for no longer than 2 hours so that the evidence can dry out. Another major problem with the case against Antonio and Ricard is the lack of physical evidence connecting them to the crime. The only thing that linked Antonio and Ricard to the murders was a piece of paper that had Antonio's brother's name on it. The piece of paper wasn't in the hole, instead it was found nearby with some other garbage. What are the chances that a piece of paper would lie in the same place for 2.5 months without it being blown away by the wind? Also, the girls were supposedly sexually assaulted for hours, tortured, and mutilated in the abandoned house in La Romana. But no traces of forensic evidence, like blood or hairs, were found in the house. Another problem is that in Ricard's confession, he said that the girls were shot in the hole. But there was no blood in the hole, and the investigators knew that the girls were killed elsewhere and dumped in the hole. When the original medical examiners washed the bodies, a lot of evidence was lost, but 15 hairs were found either on the girls or in and around the grave. They seem to be pubic hair, and it's believed that the hairs came from 5 to 7 people. None of the hairs matched the girls, nor did they match Miguel Ricard. Many people, including Miriam's father and Antonio's mother, think that something much more nefarious happened. They think the girls were tortured and killed by members of Spain's social elite, which includes prominent politicians, high-ranking members of the civil guard, and CEOs of major corporations, among other people. They are apparently members of a secret society or a cult. They also think that the secret society killed the girls as part of a snuff film. Miriam's father teamed up with a crime writer, and they did their own investigation into the girls' murders. Supposedly, a priest in Alcazar knew a man who was involved in the murders. He was apparently racked with guilt, and he turned over his copy of the snuff film to the priest. The priest then supposedly handed over the snuff film to the writer. The writer claims that in the video, it clearly shows Miriam being tortured and killed by 4 men. The writer said that he gave a copy of the snuff film to the civil guard, but they never did anything about it. The writer has never gone public with the tape. A lot of people doubt the existence of the videotape. One person who could possibly clear up a lot of the mystery is Antonio Angles, but he has never been found. In the months after the bodies were found, there were sightings of him all over Spain. One man claimed he was kidnapped by Antonio, and Antonio forced him to drive him to a different town. Another man said that one day, he came home and he found a wallet that didn't belong to him on his bedside table. In the wall were fake ID cards that were made with photographs of Antonio. One of the photographs featured him with blonde hair. No matter how close the civil guard got, the small-time drug dealer with no influential connections managed to stay one step ahead of the civil guard, and he was never arrested. However, some people suspect that the fake IDs were planted in the man's house, possibly by the police, and Antonio was never in the man's home. The leading theory about what happened to Antonio is that he made it out of Spain on a boat. One rumor is that he pretended to be a Portuguese stowaway on a ship headed for Ireland. A couple months after the girls' bodies were found, crew members aboard the ship, the city of Plymouth, which was heading from Spain to Ireland, said that they found a stowaway in the engine room. After he was discovered, he tried to flee on a life raft and was stopped by French authorities. He was returned to the ship, and he was locked in a cabin. Near the coast of Dublin, he somehow escaped from the cabin, and he got hold of a life jacket. It is assumed that he jumped overboard. As to what happened to him after he jumped ship is unknown. It's very possible that he drowned, or it's also possible that he got to land. Later that same year, a man's skull was found by a fisherman off the coast of Baltimore, Cork County, Ireland. The skull belonged to a man that was 20 to 40 years old. It is not known if the skull belonged to the stowaway, but what is known is that, according to DNA tests, it is not Antonio's skull. Something else that is unknown is if Antonio really was the stowaway. Among the stowaway's belongings they left on the ship when he jumped overboard, there were some cigarettes. Supposedly, Antonio didn't smoke. The civil guard never found any compelling evidence that Antonio was ever on the ship. Another theory is that Antonio got on a ship and he went to Brazil, which is where he was born. His family moved to Spain when he was a toddler. But once again, no evidence has been found that backs up that theory. The last confirmed sighting of Antonio is when he walked out of prison in March 1992, 8 months before the girls went missing. His friends and family swear that they have not had contact with him after he left the prison. Antonio's mother doesn't believe her son was involved in the murders, and instead, she thinks he was just a convenient scapegoat. She said that the real killers are a group that she calls the men in suits. She admitted that Antonio was abusive and he did some terrible things, but she doesn't think he's capable of the brutality of the triple murder. She said that she does not think that her son is alive. She said that if he is alive, then she doesn't want to see him again. Even though he has not been seen since 8 months before the murders, Antonio Inglés is still considered the prime suspect in the triple homicide, and there is an active warrant out for his arrest. In 2006, the Spanish Supreme Court adopted the Patron Doctrine. The doctrine limits prison terms to a maximum of 30 years. As a result, Miguel Ricard's sentence was reduced, and in November 2013, after serving 21 years, he was released from prison. He maintains his innocence, and he says he is a scapegoat. Number 3. Lester Eubanks. In the fall of 1965, Mary Ellen Diener was 14 years old, and she lived in Mansfield, Ohio. Her mother said that she was never any trouble. She said that Mary Ellen always had her nose in a book. Her family wasn't Catholic, but Mary Ellen had developed a deep interest in the religion. She had talked about becoming a nun when she grew up. On November 14, 1965, at about 10:30 p.m., Mary Ellen and her 12-year-old sister, Brenda Sue, went to a laundromat to wash their family's clothes. They ran out of dimes and nickels, so Mary Ellen left the laundromat to go find some change. Unfortunately, she didn't return to the laundromat. Brenda and Sue went to their grandmother's house, which was just a short distance from the laundromat. The grandmother went looking for Mary Ellen, and she found the police taping off a crime scene behind a vacant house that was a short distance from the laundromat. Someone walking their dog found a dead body, and they called the police. The grandmother instantly felt sick to her stomach. She asked the police to see the victim. They took her to the body, and with a deeply broken heart, she identified the body as her 14-year-old granddaughter, Mary Ellen. The medical examiner determined that she had been killed in an attempted rape. She had been shot twice, once in the right side of the chest and in the abdomen. Then, when she was either unconscious or dead, the killer smashed a brick into her head. Either the brick to the head or the gunshots were enough on their own to kill her. Lying beside her body was a roll of nickels and a roll of dimes. The police checked the records for people who lived in the area that had recently purchased a gun. They learned that 22-year-old Lester Eubanks had just bought a gun that was the same caliber of gun as the murder weapon. Eubanks was the son of a preacher, and he had a horrifying criminal record. He was first arrested when he was 16 for assaulting a 12-year-old girl. After he was arrested, he admitted to grabbing another 12-year-old girl, but she screamed, so he let her go. When Mary Ellen was killed, Eubanks was out on bond after he was charged for assault for attacking an 18-year-old waitress. Eubanks voluntarily went to the police station the day after Mary Ellen's murder. It wasn't long before he admitted to killing her. In May 1966, he went to trial and he was found guilty. The judge sentenced him to death. While on death row, he was given 6 days of execution. Then in 1972, the United States Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty was unconstitutional. As a result, everyone who was on death row had their sentences commuted to life sentences. After getting off death row, Eubanks was entitled to new freedoms for prisoners who were serving life sentences. This included being allowed to take excursions out of the prison for good behavior. On December 7, 1973, about 7.5 years after he was sentenced to death for murdering a 14-year-old girl, Eubanks was dropped off at a mall in Columbus, Ohio. He was allowed to do some Christmas shopping, completely unsupervised. When the prison officials went to pick him up again, he wasn't at the mall. It was like he had vanished into thin air. The U.S. Marshal Service thinks that since he escaped so quickly, he must have had help. As for who helped him is a mystery. It's also a mystery where he went after he got to the mall. When Mary Ellen's family found out about the escape, they were astonished. They didn't know how Eubanks could go from death row to unsupervised trips to the mall in less than a year. Over the decades, the Marshal Service has followed up on several leads, but they have never found any trace of Eubanks. They are confident that he is still alive, and one day he'll be arrested. Unfortunately, if he is still alive, after 45 years on the lam, he's avoided justice for most of his life. If Lester Eubanks is still alive, then he is 74 years old. Number 2. John William McGrath. In 1967, John William McGrath was 17 years old. He lived with his parents and his 2 younger brothers in Newport, New Hampshire. He was an excellent student, and he was voted class intellectual by his fellow students. 1967 was his last year of high school, and he had applied to Dartmouth College. However, he was having some mental problems, and he was an outpatient at a psychiatric hospital. A doctor had diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. On March 10, 1962, John worked his shift at a grocery store, and then he had a date that evening. But then his parents forced him to cancel the date because they needed him to babysit his brothers, Peter, who was 14, and 5-year-old Charles. John was upset by this, and he was sick of babysitting his brothers. That evening, John's parents, Francis and Willina, got into an argument. They apparently fought a lot, and John was sick of the fighting. After they got into their argument, his parents left in their car, leaving John and his 2 brothers home alone. Both John's uncle and his father served in World War II. His uncle had taken a high-powered rifle from a dead Japanese soldier, and the rifle was at the family's home. John grabbed the rifle and loaded it. He found his 14-year-old brother Peter in a hallway. He shot Peter twice, once in the elbow and once in the face. John then went to Charles's room, and as his 5-year-old brother slept, he shot him to death as well. John then sat and waited for 2 hours for his parents to come home. When his 40-year-old mother, Willina, opened the door, he shot her in the head. His 37-year-old father tried to run, but he couldn't get away from his 17-year-old son. Like his wife and 2 youngest sons, he was shot to death as well. After slaughtering his family, John got into his parents' car and he drove the 45 miles to the state hospital in Concord, New Hampshire, where he was an outpatient. Wearing clothes that were splattered in blood, he went into the hospital and he asked to see his doctor. A nurse told him that the doctor was unavailable since it was after hours. John then pulled out 4 rifle cartridges, and he told the nurse that he had killed his family. John was taken to the police station by a security guard, and once there, he confessed to the police. Officers went to his house, and they found the dead bodies of his family. He went on to explain how he felt after killing his brothers, telling the police, "I felt I had done something wrong, that I shouldn't have done it, but since I had started it, I should finish. I felt elated, in a state of shock, in a frenzy, but I had no emotional feeling. I was washed out." In 1965, his case was brought in front of the grand jury. The grand jury ultimately chose not to press charges because they felt that John had suffered a psychotic break at the time of the massacre. Instead, he was committed to a psychiatric hospital indefinitely. His court record said that it would be dangerous to permit the said John William McGrath to go at large. 3 years after being hospitalized, the doctors thought that John's condition had improved greatly. He had spent the 3 years doing constructive activities around the hospital. He painted a mural on a wall, he wrote book reviews for the hospital's newspaper, and he did correspondence courses in math and science. As a result of his good behavior, he was granted conditional parole so that he could take classes at a local college. But after 8 months of being on parole, he ran into problems. He had been caught buying illegal drugs outside the hospital, and he had stolen drugs from the hospital's pharmacy. For the drug offenses, he was transferred to prison for a short time. He was then sent back to live at the hospital. A few months after being transferred back, he was granted permission to walk around the grounds of the hospital unescorted because of his good behavior. On August 13, 1974, 10 years into his sentence, 29-year-old John walked away from the hospital grounds, and no one knows where he went. The police have investigated several leads, but they have never found a trace of John after he left the hospital. They have his fingerprints and dental records on file, but as of 2014, they did not have his DNA profile. His living relatives are too distant to build a DNA profile. A police officer who oversaw the case said he could be a successful businessman in some part of the country or in a pauper's grave in Cleveland, Ohio. We may never know. One possible clue came to light 14 years after his escape. John was very close to his maternal grandmother, and she supported him even after he killed his family. In 1988, she died, and she left her estate, which was valued at $32,000, to her grandson, John. John did not collect the money, but some people think that it's evidence that his grandmother knew that he was alive and that she possibly helped him with his escape. If John William McGrath is alive, he would be 74 at the time of this posting. Number 1. Sharon Kinney. Sharon Hall was born in November 1939 in Independence, Missouri. In the summer of 1956, when she was 16 years old, she met 22-year-old James Kinney at a Mormon church function. They dated for the rest of the summer, and then James returned to school at Brigham Young University. While he was away at school, Sharon wrote him a letter saying she was pregnant. In October 1956, James took a break from school so that he and Sharon could get married. Sharon supposedly miscarried the child that led to the marriage, but she soon found herself pregnant again. She gave birth to a daughter named Dana in the autumn of 1957. James and Sharon's marriage was a rocky one. James worked nights at a factory and he earned a meager income. Sharon loved to spend what little money he made. Sharon also wasn't satisfied with being with one man, and she started having extramarital affairs. James learned about the affairs, and on March 18, 1960, he told his parents that he and Sharon were getting divorced. The next day, at around 5:30 p.m., Sharon called the police because something horrible had happened. The police and paramedics arrived a few minutes later. They found James on a bed with a gunshot wound in the back of his head. He died before he reached the hospital. Sharon said that James was resting alone in bed and she was in the washroom. Suddenly, she heard a gunshot. She went to the bedroom and found James bleeding from the back of the head, and Dana, their 18-month-old daughter, was holding the gun. Sharon said that Dana accidentally shot James in the head. The police interviewed the neighbors and friends of the family, and they said that James had let Dana play with handguns. A paraffin test detects the presence of gunpowder on someone's hand, but neither Dana nor Sharon's hands were tested. The police tested if Dana was even capable of pulling the trigger, and she could. James's death was labeled an accident. Since it was an accidental death, Sharon was able to collect $29,000 from a life insurance policy that James had. Accounting for inflation, that was about $245,000 in 2018. On May 23rd, nearly 2 months after James was killed and buried, Sharon called the police. She and her boyfriend, a man named John Baldiz, had found the body of a woman named Patricia Jones on the outskirts of Independence. Sharon said she knew Patricia, who was 23 years old, and had heard she went missing the night before. Sharon said she decided to go look for Patricia, and she asked Baldiz to help. Baldiz said he was the one who suggested going to the area where Patricia's body was found. Baldiz said that the area was a lover's lane, and he and Sharon went there often on dates, even while her husband was alive. It turned out that Sharon was the last person to see Patricia alive. Sharon said that she met with Patricia on the day she went missing to tell her that her sister was having an affair with Patricia's husband, Walter. Sharon said that after their meeting, she dropped Patricia off at home. Patricia then started talking to a man who was outside of her house. Sharon said that when she drove away, Patricia was fine. The police investigated Sharon's claims, and it turned out that she wasn't being honest. It was Sharon, and not her sister, who was having an affair with Patricia's husband, Walter. Sharon met Walter when she bought a car from the car dealership where he worked. She bought the car with the money from James's life insurance policy. The day before Patricia was killed, Sharon told Walter that she was pregnant. She thought that when she told him this, he would feel obligated to leave his wife and marry her. But it didn't go that way. Instead, Walter ended the affair. The very next day, Patricia was killed. The medical examiner determined that Patricia had been shot 4 times, including once in the head, with a .22 caliber pistol. This was the same caliber of gun that killed James. The police checked and they still had that gun in their possession, so it wasn't the gun used to kill Patricia. Then one of Sharon's male friends told the police that he had purchased a .22 caliber pistol for her a few weeks before Patricia was killed. The police asked Sharon to see the gun, and she said she had lost it. Sharon was arrested on the day that Patricia was buried, and she was charged with her murder. Not long afterward, she was also charged with James's murder. In January 1961, Sharon gave birth to a daughter named Marla. 6 months later, Sharon went to trial for the murder of Patricia Jones. The prosecution showed that Sharon was having an affair with Patricia's husband. She was the last person to see Patricia alive, and she just happened to be the person who found Patricia's body. Sharon's lawyers pointed out that there was no physical evidence that proves she shot Patricia. The jury deliberated for about an hour and a half, and Sharon was found not guilty. 6 months after that, she went to trial for the murder of her husband, James. She was found guilty, and she was sentenced to life in prison. Her lawyers appealed the conviction, and the Missouri Supreme Court found that there was a problem during the jury selection process. So in March 1963, Sharon's conviction was overturned, and she was granted a new trial. A few months later, in July, she was released from prison on bond to await her trial. She went to trial a second time for the murder of James in March 1964. But that trial ended in a mistrial because there was a problem with one of the members of the jury. 3 months later, Sharon went to trial a third time for the murder of James. That trial resulted in a hung jury. The all-male jury had voted 7-5 to acquit. A fourth trial was scheduled for October 1964, but a month before that, Sharon and her new boyfriend, Francis Samuel Pugliese, traveled to Mexico City. Sharon got into Mexico by pretending she was married to Pugliese, and she used his last name. On September 18th, the police in Mexico City were called to a hotel. A staff member said that he had been shot by a woman and he had locked her in one of the rooms. The police arrived a short time later, and in the room with the woman shooter, they found a dead man with 2 bullet wounds in his chest lying on the floor. The woman was arrested and identified as Sharon Kinney. Sharon was taken to the Secret Service headquarters where she was interviewed. Sharon said that being in a foreign country made her nervous, so when she crossed the border, she brought her gun with her. She said that earlier that night, she had gotten into a fight with her boyfriend, Francis Samuel Pugliese, and she stormed out of their hotel room. She ended up at a bar where she met 45-year-old Francisco Paredes Ordonez. Ordonez was born in Mexico, but he was a naturalized American citizen, and he worked as a radio announcer in Chicago, Illinois. Eventually, Ordonez invited Sharon back to his room, and she accepted. Sharon said that once they were in his room, he started making sexual advances on her, and she told him to stop. She said she felt she was in danger, so she shot Ordonez twice in the chest. A hotel staff member heard the gunshots, and he went to investigate. When he looked in the room, Sharon fired a shot at him. He was shot in the shoulder, but he was able to lock Sharon in the room, and he called the police. The hotel staff member recovered from his wound. Not long after she was arrested, Sharon was charged with Ordonez's murder. The police searched her hotel room, and they found 2 more guns. One of the guns was the weapon that was used to kill Patricia Jones. Sharon went to trial for Ordonez's murder in October 1965 in Mexico City. The prosecution argued that Sharon went out that night looking for someone to kill. She was found guilty, and she was sentenced to 10 years of prison. She appealed her sentence, and a panel of 3 judges decided that her original sentence was too lenient, so they extended her sentence by 3 years. By December 1969, Sharon had been in prison for 5 years. Then on December 7th, there was a blackout in the prison. At 5:30 p.m., Sharon wasn't at roll call, but the guards did nothing about it. That evening, Sharon wasn't at the second roll call. Several hours after the second roll call, the authorities at the prison alerted the police that Sharon had escaped. The FBI was notified, but they strongly doubted that she would return to the United States. Sharon became fluent in Spanish during her 5 years of prison, so the Mexican authorities thought that she probably crossed the border into Guatemala. After 12 days of searching, no trace of Sharon was found, and the search was called off. If Sharon Kinney is still alive, her current whereabouts are unknown. Besides going to Guatemala, another theory is that she escaped with the help of Ordonez's family. After they got her out of prison, they killed her. However, there is not a single piece of evidence to back up this theory. If Sharon Kinney is still alive today, then she is 78 years old. Number 3. Eugene Palmer. The FBI describes Eugene Palmer of Stony Point, New York as interested in auto racing and a car enthusiast. They also describe him as an experienced hunter and outdoorsman. But most importantly, the Bureau calls him armed and dangerous. Eugene Palmer is one of the most wanted men by the FBI. In the autumn of 2012, Eugene's relationship with his 39-year-old daughter-in-law, Tammy Palmer, was at an all-time low. Tammy accused Eugene's son, John, of assault and got a restraining order against him. Despite being separated from his son, Tammy was still living in the home owned by Eugene. Tammy and John had a tumultuous relationship. Tammy had accused John of infidelity and violence. The couple had 2 teenage children together. On September 24, 2012, Eugene and Tammy got into a heated argument. Tammy allegedly attacked Eugene with a log. This proved to be too much for the 73-year-old grandfather. Police records say that Eugene ambushed 39-year-old Tammy as she walked up the driveway after putting her kids on the school bus. He fired 3 shots at her, the third hitting her at close range. According to Eugene's sister, Elaine Babcock, he drove down the street to her house and admitted to killing Tammy. Eugene left money for the family to pay for the property taxes and asked for an hour's head start. He was last seen entering nearby Harriman State Park. The police found his 1995 Dodge Ram deserted in the woods sometime later. There have been no confirmed sightings of Eugene Palmer since he entered the woods. Investigators combed the woods using trained dogs to find him. The Department of Defense sent helicopters with infrared technology to aid in the search, but no trace of him was found. After several years and no trace of Eugene was found, some people began to believe that he was dead, but that didn't stop the FBI from adding him to their 10 most wanted fugitives list in 2019. In 2021, the authorities received a tip that Eugene was hiding at his granddaughter's Warwick, New York home. On August 17, 2021, 40 FBI agents raided the home of Jamie Lynn Rose. When questioned, the FBI claimed they used appropriate force. In a social media post, Rose said that her children were home during the raid. She wrote, "My children, my babies, were handcuffed like felons and slammed against cars. When does it end? When is enough enough? When will they leave my family alone?" As of June 2023, Eugene Palmer is still wanted by the FBI. They are offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. It's believed that he was the oldest person added to the most wanted list. Without his arrest or retrieving his remains, the case will remain open. Investigators have traveled to Colorado and Arizona, acting on tips they've received. In November 2012, a state grand jury indicted Eugene on second-degree murder in absentia. The indictment allowed the police to apprehend him nationwide. Eugene Palmer is wanted for the unlawful flight to avoid prosecution in the alleged murder of Tammy Palmer. 10 years after his disappearance, Eugene's son, Clarence Palmer, said he doesn't believe his father is alive. Clarence said, "Since the day it happened, no one has seen or heard from him. I know him. He is my father. I know the way he is, or was. He's in this park as his final resting area." Eugene had diabetes and a heart condition. He also left the house in slippers and was ill-prepared for the wilderness. However, he was an experienced woodsman and knew the terrain. Michael Kruger of the Haverstraw Police Department, who's been investigating since the beginning, believes that Eugene is alive. Kruger said, "We didn't forget about it. We're never going to forget about it. He needs to be brought to justice for the family." In July 2022, Eugene Palmer was removed from the FBI's 10 most wanted list, but he is still considered a wanted man. At the time of this recording, if Eugene Palmer is still alive, he'd be 84 years old. Number 2. Andrew Dabbs. In 1981, 21-year-old Robin Shea was in an abusive relationship with 41-year-old auto mechanic Andrew Dabbs. According to Shea's sister, Joyce Carter, Dabbs threatened the 21-year-old. "We understand the hold he had on her," she said in a video posted by the FBI. Although Dabbs was in a relationship with Shea, he was married with 2 children. On October 10, 1981, Dabbs allegedly beat Shea and shot her twice with a .45 caliber revolver as the couple drove through Norton, Massachusetts. Dabbs then pushed his girlfriend out of the car and left her on the side of Route 123. A passing motorist found her half conscious. She was taken to the hospital, but died an hour after she was found. Shea's parents identified her after seeing her description on the news. The police searched for Andrew Dabbs, but they didn't have any luck. A month later, Bristol County Superior Court indicted Dabbs for murder and issued a warrant for his arrest. The police branched out their search nationwide. On September 20, 1982, a United States magistrate issued a federal warrant for Dabbs' arrest. He was charged with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. While his last known address was in New Hampshire, the police said he has ties to Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Massachusetts, and Colorado. Almost 40 years after the murder, the FBI posted the case on their social media sites, hoping the public would provide more tips. They posted an age-enhanced video to show what Dabbs would look like at age 78. A $20,000 reward is also being offered for any information on the whereabouts of Dabbs. While some think that Andrew Dabbs is dead, solving the case would bring Rob and Shay's family closure. Shay's sister, Joyce Carter, said, "Maybe he's dead, and if he is, I would love to know that. I would love to know more of that detail, and if he isn't dead, if he's alive, he needs to pay for what he did." At the time of this video, if Andrew Dabbs is still alive, he would be 80 years old. He is still wanted by the FBI, and he is considered armed and dangerous. Number 1. Tyrone Theus. In the summer of 1993, 20-year-old Tyrone Theus was the manager at Leathers Oil Company gas station in Gresham, Oregon. He'd been working at the gas station since April 1992. In August 1993, the 20-year-old was accused of stealing $30. The manager suspended Theus, but Theus told his employer he wouldn't be coming back. He said he needed a change in scenery. Theus later returned the money and apologized. The theft was surprising to his employer. Theus was regarded as wholesome, on time, and conscientious. On January 17, 1994, Theus returned to the gas station. This time he was joined by his cousin, 20-year-old Larry Scherf, and his friend, 23-year-old Lori Stevens. Stevens and Scherf waited in the car while Theus, armed with a gun, entered the station. That night, 3 people were working: 47-year-old Virginia K. Endicott, 51-year-old Rosalie Faye Gertz, and her daughter-in-law, 25-year-old Mary Beth Wheeler. The former employee stole $9,000 from the safe and cash register. Theus then ordered the women into the storage room and had them lay on the ground. He then shot each woman in the back of the head, execution style, and took off with the money. He then got in the car with Stevens and Scherf, and they took off. A customer found the slain women soon after and called the police. The police later theorized that Theus scoped out the station before making his move. They suspected he hid his former workplace on a Sunday where more money would be in the register. The murders shocked the city of Gresham, which had a population of less than 80,000. All 3 women were well known in the community. Initially, the police were at a loss as to who would rob the gas station. But about a month after the triple homicide, the police received a tip from an informant that led them to Theus. Theus had hung around and acted as if everything was normal. The police interviewed Scherf and Stevens as part of their investigation. Once Theus found out his accomplices were talking, he decided to run. The police searched his apartment, but they found no sign of him. Theus's last known sighting was on February 10, 1994. A warrant for murder and robbery was issued against him. The FBI released a wanted poster for Theus in May 1994. They said a distinguishing feature is a panther tattoo on his abdomen. Scherf and Stevens both confessed to their parts in the deadly robbery. In an interview with the press, Stevens' husband told the reporters that she drove the men to the station, not knowing they would rob the place. Scherf and Stevens were charged with felony murder and robbery. Scherf pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder and robbery in September 1994. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Stevens also pleaded guilty, and she also received a reduced sentence of 10 years in October 1994. Scherf and Stevens agreed to testify against Theus if he was ever arrested. Tyrone Theus's disappearance garnered plenty of media attention. High-profile shows such as Unsolved Mysteries in 1995 and America's Most Wanted in 2011 documented his crimes. In 2016, the news outlet The Oregonian listed the crime as one of the Pacific Northwest's most notorious murders. Some investigators believe that Theus is alive and living in the U.S. under an alias. Others believe he died by suicide. In 1996, a passerby discovered skeletal remains near Troutdale Airport in Portland, Oregon. Initially, it was thought that the remains were Theus's. However, dental records determined that they were not his remains. Theus's arrest would provide answers to the families of the slain women. Charlene Gert's sister, Charlene Worsley, told a news outlet, "How did he get away so easily without even being seen? Somebody had to help him. I worry he might hurt someone else." The FBI released agent-enhanced photos of the fugitive to show what he might look like at age 45. As of June 2023, Tyrone Theus's whereabouts are unknown. If he's still alive, he would be 50 years old. Number 3. Yasser Abdel Saeed. Yasser Abdel Saeed was born in 1957 in Egypt. Yasser immigrated to the Dallas, Texas area in 1983 with his mother, brother, and sister. They left Egypt after Yasser's parents got divorced and his father remarried. In the United States, Yasser mostly worked menial jobs. In early 1987, he was working at a convenience store in Tarrant County, Texas. In February of that year, he met Patricia Owens, and within a week, they were married. Patricia was 15 years old at the time. The following year, Patricia gave birth to a son, Islam. That was followed by a daughter, Amina, a year later in 1989, and another daughter, Sarah, in 1990. Yasser was abusive and controlling. In October 1997, Patricia left Yasser, and he did not take kindly to this. As retaliation, he picked up the children at school and drove to Virginia with them. He called Patricia and told her he had taken the children to the Middle East and she'd never see them again. Yasser and Patricia reconciled in March 1998. About 7 months later, in October 1998, Amina, who was 9, and Sarah, who was 8, told their grandmother that their father had been sexually abusing them. They said that the abuse had been going on for 2 or 3 years. When Patricia found out about the accusations, she left Yasser and reported him to the sheriff's department. There was an investigation, and Yasser was subsequently charged with aggravated sexual assault. But then, in January 1999, the charges were dropped. Amina and Sarah had said they had made it all up. They said they had lied because they wanted to live with their grandmother. The family moved around a lot, and they usually lived in squalor. Since Patricia had 3 children under the age of 3 by the time she was 18, she never finished high school. So she generally could only get jobs that paid minimum wage. Yasser would drive a cab or work at a convenience store, but he rarely kept a job for very long. He would often get fired because of his erratic behavior. As his family got older, Yasser continued to abuse his family. At times, he would hurt his daughters to the point where they should have gotten medical help. But their parents wouldn't allow them to seek treatment because Yasser might have gotten in trouble. One time, Patricia tried to leave Yasser and he shot out the tires of her car. So Patricia ended up staying with Yasser. In the autumn of 2007, when Amina became a senior in high school, Yasser started planning his daughter's marriage. Yasser wanted her to marry an Egyptian man because as the father of the bride, he was expecting a big payout from the groom for the honor of marrying his 18-year-old virgin daughter. On Christmas Eve 2007, Patricia was working as a cashier at a grocery store. Amina and Sarah came into the store and they were terrified. They said that their father was going to kill them. Yasser had found out that both Amina and Sarah had boyfriends. The next day, Patricia, Amina, and Sarah and their 2 boyfriends left the state. They stopped in Kansas and then moved on to Tulsa, Oklahoma. In Tulsa, they rented an apartment. Then a few days later, on New Year's Eve, Patricia made an odd request. It was her deceased mother's birthday, and she wanted to lay flowers on her grave in East Texas. She asked Amina and Sarah to join her, and they agreed to go. It's unclear if Amina and Sarah knew that Patricia had been estranged from her mother years before she died. They had stopped talking because Patricia's mother did not approve of her staying with Yasser. It turned out that Patricia had been lured back to Texas by Yasser. Once they were back in Texas, Patricia told her daughters that she had been talking to Yasser. He wanted to meet and talk to them. Amina and Sarah initially did not want to see him, but then Sarah eventually agreed to go. When they got back to Texas, Amina had stayed at a friend's home. Patricia called Amina's cell phone several times, and when she didn't answer, Patricia went to Amina's friend's home and tried to convince her daughter to meet with her father. Begrudgingly, Amina went home with Patricia. Minutes after they got home, Yasser arrived. He was driving a taxi. Amina got into the front passenger seat, and Sarah got into the back seat. A short time later, at 7:35 p.m. on New Year's Day 2008, the following call came into 911 in Irving, Texas.
What's going on, ma'am?
I'm dying, that's what's up.
Irving Fire Department. Ma'am, are you still there? Ma'am, are you still there? All I've got is she's telling me she's dying. I've got a why? Are you still there, ma'am? Ma'am, what is your address? Ma'am.
The dispatcher determined that the phone belonged to a member of the Saeed family. First responders went to their home, and they found Patricia there with her son, Islam. They said that Amina and Sarah had gone out with their father, but they didn't know where they went. At around 8:30 p.m., about an hour after the disturbing 911 call, a taxi driver in Irving called 911. He had been parked in a hotel's taxi queue, and the cab in front of him didn't move up when it was supposed to. The taxi driver got out of his own car to talk to the other driver, but there was no one in the driver's seat. In the passenger seat, it sprawled across the back seats were the bloody bodies of two young women. It was the bodies of 18-year-old Amina and 17-year-old Sarah. Using data from cell phone towers, the police believe that Yasser drove to an area near a firing range. He parked the car and pulled out a 9mm handgun. He shot Amina twice at point-blank range, and she died nearly immediately. He then started shooting Sarah. She tried to fight off her father, and she managed to call 911. Yasser ended up shooting her 9 times. After killing his 2 daughters, Yasser drove to the hotel and left the taxi in the queue. After that, Yasser, who was carrying his Egyptian passport, vanished. Since that day, there have been no confirmed sightings of him. It is suspected that Yasser Abdel Saeed is still in North America, and he may have immersed himself in a community with Egyptian ties. Yasser has connections to New York, Texas, Virginia, and Canada. There are no flight records of him traveling to Egypt, but he may be hiding out there as well. At the time of this video, Yasser is 63 years old. He is 6'2" and he weighed 180 pounds. He had black and gray hair, and his hairline was receding. He smoked Marlboro Lights 100 cigarettes, and he frequented diners like IHOP and Denny's. He may be driving a taxi. In December 2014, nearly 7 years after Amina and Sarah's murders, Yasser was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. Over 5 years later, he remains on the list. There is a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading directly to his arrest. Before Yasser went missing, he rarely went anywhere without being armed. The FBI considers him to be armed and dangerous. Number 2. Dennis Melvin Howe. On the afternoon of January 23, 1983, 9-year-old Sharon Morningstar Keenan was playing at a park in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Sometime between 3 and 3:30, a witness saw a man approach her, and then they walked off together. Sharon was supposed to be home by 4 o'clock. She wore a watch, and she was usually punctual. So when she didn't come home at the specified time, her parents became worried. They searched the neighborhood, and when they couldn't find her, they reported her missing. The Toronto police initially dragged their feet when it came to searching for the missing 9-year-old. It wasn't until the next morning that 100 officers started looking for her. Sadly, no trace of Sharon was found. Close to the park were several boarding houses. 9 days after Sharon's disappearance, 2 detectives were going to all the boarding houses to interview the residents. They stopped off at a boarding house that was less than 200 yards from the park where Sharon was last seen. They talked to the resident who lived on the 3rd floor, and he said he had not seen the person who was living on the 2nd floor since Sharon went missing. So the detectives asked the landlord to let them into the apartment on the 2nd floor. The apartment was empty and clean. The detectives looked around for a few minutes, but they didn't find anything of interest. The detectives were about to leave, and then one of them decided to look in the refrigerator just out of curiosity. He later said that nothing specifically drew him to the refrigerator. He said he just wanted to see what was inside. He pulled on the door, but it didn't open very wide because the carpet was blocking the door. The door didn't even open wide enough to trigger the light in the fridge. So the detective looked in the fridge with his flashlight. He noticed a garbage bag and a white shirt. He then saw some human hair. The detective realized he had found the body of Sharon Morningstar Keenan. After she was killed, her body was put into a garbage bag, and then her body was placed inside the refrigerator. The medical examiner determined that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. He thought she had probably been killed on the night she went missing. Immediately, the police issued an arrest warrant for the man who rented the room, Mike Burns. The problem was that no one had a photo of Burns. The only thing the police had was samples of his handwriting, and they made that public. But no viable leads regarding his whereabouts came in. A few weeks later, the Toronto police learned that Mike Burns was not the man's real name. Mike Burns was a man who lived in Regina, Saskatchewan, who either lost his ID or had it stolen sometime the year before. On March 5, 1983, over a month after Sharon's body was found, the police uncovered the man's real name. He was 42-year-old Dennis Melvin Howe. Howe was born in Regina, Saskatchewan in September 1940. It's believed that his first brush with the law happened when he was 22 years old. He was arrested for breaking into several homes. For those crimes, he was sentenced to 2 years in jail. In 1965, Howe was back out on the streets. That year, he was arrested and convicted of indecent assault on a young girl. He served a little more than 2 years, and then he was released. On May 30th, 1969, Howe was arrested again for 2 sets of crimes. Earlier that month, he had kidnapped a woman at gunpoint and robbed her. A few weeks later, he threatened a woman with a knife and made her drive him around. He also stole some money from her. He then forced the woman to go into a cafe with him. She threw hot coffee in his face and made her escape. Howe was arrested a short time later. Howe was ultimately convicted of an array of crimes, and he was sentenced to 14 years of prison. Even in prison, Howe continued to be a problem. In April 1977, he escaped from jail and led the authorities on a high-speed chase through Regina. Howe ended up serving about 12.5 years. He was released on February 17, 1982. He was supposed to be under mandatory supervision, but he took off. 3 days later, he was in Toronto, Ontario. He got a job in a garment factory using the identity of Mike Burns. Howe lived in Toronto for 11 months, and then he left immediately after Sharon was murdered. The last time Howe was seen was the morning after the murder. He was in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, which is over 430 miles from Toronto. He had taken a Greyhound bus from Toronto to Sault Ste. Marie, and he was transferring to a bus heading to Winnipeg, Manitoba. Where he went after that is a mystery. After Howe vanished, one of his brothers made nearly a dozen mysterious trips to Washington State and Montana. His brother was questioned by the police, and he said the trips had nothing to do with his brother. But after he was questioned, he suddenly stopped making the trips. One of Howe's most notable physical traits is that he had bad teeth. So dentists all over North America were sent his wanted poster. One dentist thought he was working on Howe, and he called the police. It turned out not to be Howe, but a different fugitive wanted for an unrelated crime. In 1986, it was revealed that the police don't think that Sharon Morningstar Keenan was the first person that Howe killed. On April 12, 1969, 59-year-old Grace McNeil was found dead on her kitchen floor in her home in Regina, Saskatchewan. She had been sexually assaulted and then stabbed in the throat with a piece of metal. The murder happened about a month before Howe was arrested for kidnapping and robbing the 2 women. Howe was questioned, and he said he wasn't even in Regina on the night of the murder. He said he had spent the night at his girlfriend's grandmother's farm, which is in a village over 30 miles from Regina. But both Howe's girlfriend and her grandmother said he didn't come out to the farm until the day after the murder. When Howe arrived at the farm, he gave the grandmother a pair of commemorative mugs. One of McNeil's friends said that McNeil had the exact same mugs and they were missing after her murder. Also, Howe's girlfriend knew McNeil. McNeil lived across the park from her, and McNeil was the mother-in-law of her cousin. She also remembered pointing out McNeil's home to Howe. The police said that if Howe is ever found alive, they want to question him again regarding Grace McNeil's murder. Several strange possible leads to the whereabouts of Dennis Melvin Howe have emerged over the years. In 1999, the police got a tip that Howe was dead and he was buried in a cemetery in Sudbury, Ontario. It all started 13 years earlier, in 1986, when a man living in Winnipeg named Peter Sanderson had his wallet stolen. He reported the theft to the police and he replaced all his pieces of identification. In 1995, Sanderson had heart surgery, so he applied for health benefits. When he did, the government of Canada said he wasn't the real Peter Sanderson because the real Peter Sanderson had died in May 1988 and he was buried in a pauper's grave in Sudbury. The living Peter Sanderson had served in the armed forces, so the government had his fingerprints on file. They compared his fingerprints to the fingerprints they had on file, and it proved that Peter Sanderson was his real identity, and the dead man had been using his stolen identification. The police soon became convinced that the dead man was really Dennis Melvin Howe. After all, Howe had used a stolen identity before, and he was last seen heading to Winnipeg, where Sanderson lived when his wallet was stolen. In October 1999, the body of the man who used Sanderson's ID was exhumed, and bone and tissue samples were taken. A DNA comparison proved that the man was not Dennis Melvin Howe. The dead man's identity is still a mystery. In 2008, a user posted in the forum unsolvedcanada.ca under the name Van Ringo. Unsolved Canada was a forum where true crime buffs could discuss unsolved Canadian crimes. Van Ringo wrote an odd tale that started back in 1998 when he was watching the television show America's Most Wanted. They showed a segment on Dennis Melvin Howe. Van Ringo, who lived outside of Boise, Idaho, wrote that he recognized Howe. He wrote that Howe was living in a homeless shelter in Boise, and he was using the name Tommy Ross. He had hired Howe to do odd jobs around his appliance repair shop and his art gallery. Van Ringo wrote that when he realized Tommy Ross was Dennis Melvin Howe, he called the hotline for America's Most Wanted and told them where to find him. Van Ringo wrote that a few days later, he noticed two men near his art gallery. He claimed he recognized them from the episode of America's Most Wanted. They were the detectives who had worked on Sharon Morningstar Keenan's case. Van Ringo then speculated that the Canadian and American authorities had conspired together to have Howe killed instead of arresting him. For reasons that were never really explained, Van Ringo thought that they had dropped Howe from 30,000 feet, possibly while nude, so he could think about his crimes on the way down. Another user who was following Sharon's case because he lived in the area when it happened read Van Ringo's post and he became curious. He investigated Van Ringo and he noticed some similarities between him and Howe. They were about the same age, the same height, and they looked similar. Van Ringo also had a connection to Toronto. It was his wife's hometown. So the other user got in contact with the authorities and told them about Van Ringo's post. The police identified Van Ringo as Robert James Miller. He was an eccentric man who owned a cluttered appliance repair shop outside Boise, Idaho. He was also an art collector. He claimed he owned paintings by Van Gogh and Rembrandt. In July 2013, two FBI agents paid Miller a visit. They asked him a lot of questions, and they asked to see evidence that he really was Robert James Miller. Miller cooperated with the investigators by answering all their questions and giving them all the evidence they requested. He swore he was not Dennis Melvin Howe. He said he had never even been to Canada. He was married to a woman who grew up in Toronto, but they had met in California. It took 2 years, but the FBI finally concluded that Miller and Howe were not the same man. The authorities in Canada are still looking for Dennis Melvin Howe. He may be using the aliases Michael Burns, Wayne King, Ralph Ferguson, or Jim Myers. He has short, crooked fingers and he's left-handed. When Howe went missing, he smoked and drank heavily. He had bad teeth and a small gap between his front teeth. One of his more noticeable quirks was that he tended to call people turkeys. At the time of this video, if Dennis Melvin Howe is still alive, he is 79 years old. Many people do not think he is alive. Before Howe went missing, he spent most of his adult life in prison. Had he been arrested in North America in the past 30 years, a fingerprint or DNA check would have alerted the Canadian authorities because they have his fingerprints and his DNA on file. Could Howe have stayed completely out of trouble after killing Sharon? Regardless, the police would still like to know what happened to Howe after he fled Toronto. No matter how old Howe is, the authorities think that, if he is still alive, he should face justice for what he did to Sharon Morningstar Keenan. Number 1. Taylor Morris Teaford. On the night of July 18, 1967, 39-year-old Charles Culpepper was driving with his mother in Madera County, California. Suddenly, a woman ran out of a house and flagged them down. She screamed she had been shot and her brother was trying to kill her. Charles got out of his car and 6 gunshots rang out. Charles was shot once and his car took 5 bullets. Charles's mother was unharmed. Charles managed to get the injured woman into his car and they drove off. The woman was 26-year-old Sherry McIntosh. Her brother, 32-year-old Taylor Morris Teaford, had been drinking and then he snapped. Using a .22 caliber handgun, he shot to death their 72-year-old grandmother, Pearl Teaford. Sherry's 9-year-old daughter was there that night, and when the shooting started, she ran to a neighbor's home, and the neighbor called the sheriff's department. Sheriff's deputy Kit Herring arrived on the scene, and when he stepped into the yard, Taylor opened fire on him. Herring was shot, but he managed to return fire. When he did, Taylor ran off into the mountains. Sherry McIntosh, Charles Culpepper, and Kit Herring all survived their injuries. A search of the area was conducted, but Taylor Morris Teaford was gone. Taylor had just been released from prison 4 months earlier. He had served about 10 years for breaking and entering and rape. After the shooting, Taylor managed to stay off the police's radar. In September 1968, over a year after the shooting, Taylor was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives. But this still did not lead to an arrest. It's suspected that after the shooting, Taylor got a job in a logging camp in Northern California. He may have also got a job on a ranch somewhere. He was proficient with many types of firearms, and he liked to hunt and fish. Taylor was Native American, and he had black hair and brown eyes. He was about 6 feet tall, and he weighed about 170 to 190 pounds. Taylor was muscular and lifted weights. When he was a child, he contracted polio. This left him with a noticeable limp in his right leg. Taylor was a heavy drinker, and he also did drugs. He had a violent temper, and many people in the neighborhood were afraid of him. Finally, according to the authorities, Taylor was addicted to violent sex, including bondage. On October 2, 1969, 13 months after Taylor Morris Teaford was placed on the FBI's Most Wanted list, a woman was found dead in the St. Louis Hotel in Oakland, California. She had been strangled with a piece of cloth, and she had been punched in the face several times. The woman has never been identified. It is strongly suspected that she was a sex worker. She was possibly new to town or she was passing through. It is believed that she was between the ages of 16 and 21. She had brown hair and brown eyes. She was about 5'5" and weighed 105 pounds. It is suspected that she was a drug user because she had needle marks in her arms. Several witnesses saw the woman go into the room with a man. They identified that man as Taylor Morris Teaford. It had been nearly 2.5 years since he killed his grandmother and shot 3 other people. The police thought it was plausible that Taylor was the killer because he had been convicted and served time for rape. Also, Taylor was supposedly heavily into bondage and violent sex. It's also suspected that the Jane Doe found in the hotel room was the victim of a serial killer. The first suspected murder happened about 6 months earlier. On April 10, 1969, the body of a dead woman was found beside a dirt road near the Oakland estuary. She had only been dead for a few hours. Her head had been smashed with a 30-pound chunk of concrete. Using her fingerprints, she was identified as 25-year-old Judith Latacre. She was a sex worker with no fixed address. 4 months after that, another woman's dead body was found. This body was found in the Berkeley Aquatic Park. Her face had been beaten and her throat had been slashed. She was identified days later as 27-year-old Alma DeRuff. DeRuff was a sex worker and a drug addict. Then, a month later, the Jane Doe was murdered in the room at the St. Louis Hotel. It's also suspected that the killer had one victim who survived. She was a 24-year-old sex worker and heroin addict. She had been working in downtown Oakland, and a man driving a station wagon picked her up. He then took her to some waterfront. He told her to undress, and she refused to without being paid first. He punched her several times in the face and then showed her some photographs. He said that he had killed the women in the photographs. She remembered that one of the photographs showed a woman who looked like she was dead, and she was lying in the back of the station wagon. The man then put the photographs away and kept humbling her. She managed to get out of the car and she got some help. The man drove away. The woman later said she saw the man again. She said she saw him at the St. Louis Hotel on the same day that the Jane Doe was killed. However, the newspaper reports did not say if the man she identified was Taylor Morris Teaford. That being said, the only thing that connected Taylor to the murder of Jane Doe is that witnesses saw him at the hotel on the day she was killed. Also, Taylor fits the description of the killer. The serial killer was described as tall and husky, he had an explosive temper, and he had a crew cut. Taylor, who was a convicted sex offender, was 6 feet tall, muscular, and he was known for his violent temper. Also, Taylor had a full head of hair, so it's possible that he had a crew cut. However, the vague description of the serial killer could describe any number of men. There's no physical evidence that proves Taylor was a serial killer, or that he was even alive or in California at the time the 3 women were murdered. In June 1972, for reasons that were never made public, the federal process against Taylor was dismissed. As a result, after 4 years, he was removed from the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. Taylor Morris Teaford is still wanted for the murder of his grandmother in July 1967 and the murder of Jane Doe in October 1969. If he is still alive, He is 84 years old at the time of this video. Number 3. Lord Lucan. Around 10:30 on the night of November 7th, 1974, an injured and bloody woman burst into a pub in the Belgrava district of London, England. She said that there was a murderer in her house. She had escaped, but the man killed her nanny. The police went to the house that belonged to the woman, who was identified as Veronica Duncan, who was the Countess of Lucan, and they found her children unharmed in their bedrooms. In the basement, which is where the kitchen was located, the police found a bloody canvas mail sack. Inside the sack was the dead body of the family's nanny, 29-year-old Sandra Rivet. The police interviewed Lady Lucan, and she said that she was attacked by her husband, John Bingham, 7th Earl of Lucan. Lord Lucan was a tall, handsome man who once auditioned for the role of James Bond. Instead of acting, Lucan got a job with a merchant bank in 1955, and shortly after getting hired, he started to gamble. In 1960, he won a huge jackpot of £26,000. When accounting for inflation, that is about £556,000, or about $720,000 American. After the big win, Lord Lucan quit his job and he became a full-time gambler. Lucan, who also went by the nickname Lucky Lucan, was known for his expensive tastes. He owned an Aston Martin and he drove speedboats. In early 1963, he met Veronica Duncan and they were married later that year. Lady Lucan went on to give birth to 3 children. After each birth, Duncan suffered from postpartum depression, and this led to her being medicated. Meanwhile, Lord Lucan's career as a gambler wasn't exactly paying off. He was losing more than he was winning, and the debts were piling up. Lady Lucan's mental health and Lord Lucan's debts added a lot of stress to the marriage. Lord Lucan ended up moving out of the family home 2 weeks after Christmas in 1972. Lord Lucan fought for custody of the children, but ultimately lost them to Lady Lucan. Lady Lucan said that on the night of the attack, she was at home with Rivet, even though Thursday night was her night off. Rivet had gone to the basement, where the kitchen was located, to make some tea. In the kitchen, Rivet was hit 4 times in the head with the lead pipe that was wrapped in surgical tape. After 15 minutes, Lady Lucan realized that Rivet hadn't returned to the 2nd floor of the home. She walked down to the 1st floor of the house and then tried to turn on the basement light, but it wasn't working. That's when she was hit over the head 3 times with a lead pipe and then strangled. She squeezed her attacker's testicles, and this caused him to let go of her. When he let her go, she realized that the attacker was her husband. He admitted to killing Rivet. He didn't say so, but Lady Lucan assumed that she was the intended victim. The basement was dark, and Rivet has similar body size to Lady Lucan, so it would have been easy to get them mixed up. After his confession, Lord Lucan went to the washroom to get a wet towel to clean Lady Lucan's wounds. Lady Lucan said that when he did, she used the chance to escape, and she ran to the pub. Sometime between 10 o'clock and 10:30 p.m., Lord Lucan called his mother and told her that Lady Lucan had been hurt. She needed to go to the home and pick up the children. His mother did as she was told, and she went to the house. She was surprised to see the police there, and they handed over the children to her. Lord Lucan then drove to a friend's house 60 miles away in Uckfield. Lord Lucan's car wasn't working, and for a week he had been driving a friend's car. He arrived at his friend's house at 11:15 p.m., and he told his friend a different story than the one Lady Lucan told the police. He admitted to being at the house that night. He was walking by when he saw his wife struggling with an assailant. He entered the house through an unlocked basement door and slipped on some blood. The assailant then ran off. His wife then started yelling at him that he had hired someone to kill her. He said that he tried to help her, but she ran off. Lord Lucan said that he knew how bad it looked, so he left. After telling his story to his friend, he wrote a letter to his brother-in-law and relayed the same story. In the letter, Lord Lucan said that he believed that the attacker was hired by his mentally unwell wife to frame him. He said that he was going to lie low, and he asked his brother-in-law to explain the situation to his children when they were old enough. He then took off in his friend's car. An all points bulletin was announced for the car, and it was found 3 days later in New Haven. Inside the car there was another lead pipe wrapped with surgical tape. Lord Lucan was nowhere to be found. The friend who owned the car then got a letter from Lord Lucan. He said that the night was full of horrible coincidences. He also said to tell his children good stories about him. That is the last time anyone heard from Lord Lucan. There are 3 theories as to what happened that night. The first is what Lady Lucan told the police, which was that her husband was the killer. The second theory is that Lord Lucan hired a hitman who killed the nanny by accident. Lord Lucan came to the house expecting to find his wife dead. When he discovered that she wasn't killed, he attacked her. A third possibility, which seems the most unlikely, is that Lord Lucan was telling the truth. He was walking by the house and he happened upon someone attacking his wife. In this scenario, Lord Lucan may have even been killed himself. There are several troubling aspects about the night in question. Lady Lucan said that she was attacked at 9:15, and it's believed that Lord Lucan left the house at around 9:45. Yet, Lady Lucan didn't go to the pub until about 10:30. Why didn't she go for help sooner, and what did she do during those 45 minutes? Sometime between 10 o'clock and 10:30, Lord Lucan made the call to his mother from an unknown telephone number that wasn't a payphone. The most obvious answer is that he called from his flat. The police searched the flat, and they found no traces of blood in it. What they did find in the apartment was Lord Lucan's passport and his wallet. So the police don't think that he went to the flat after the attack. What they do know is that after leaving his family's home, he drove to his friend's home in Uckfield, which was 60 miles away, and he made it there by 11:15. It's a 2-hour drive if you're following the speed limit, and Lord Lucan did the drive in an hour and a half. The friend didn't notice any blood on Lord Lucan, but she said that it looked like his pants were damp. If he beat Rivet to death and stuffed her into the sack, he would have been splattered with blood. So when did he have time to wash the blood stains out of his clothes? Also, wouldn't it just have been easier to change into a new set of clothes? In 2005, the BBC program Inside Out revealed that in May 1998, an unknown person called the police several times about Lord Lucan's whereabouts. He said that on the night of the murder, he saw 2 men lead Lord Lucan to a cesspool that was behind his friend's house in Uckfield. He heard a gunshot, and then only 2 men walked back to the house. The BBC had a forensic archaeologist examine the cesspool, and she found a subtle disturbance, meaning that there is the possibility that there is a body in the cesspool. The police never looked in the cesspool because the anonymous caller refused to meet. While it's possible that Lord Lucan was innocent and he was killed himself, many people do not believe that's what happened. Lord Lucan was found guilty in absentia for the murder of Sandra Rivet in June 1975, and he was declared dead in 1999. In 2004, Scotland Yard reopened the case to get a DNA profile from Lord Lucan. Unfortunately, the DNA gave no insights into what happened to Lord Lucan, and his whereabouts remain a mystery. Some people think that he died by suicide. His wife thinks that he jumped off the ferry near where he dumped the car. Another theory, which comes from a former gambling buddy of Lord Lucan's, is that he shot himself and he was fed to a tiger at a zoo that was owned by one of his friends. Other people don't think that Lord Lucan killed himself, and instead he used his connections to move abroad with a new identity. In the months after he disappeared, there were sightings of him in Australia, South Africa, France, and New Zealand. He was also spotted in an ex-Nazi colony in Paraguay and working as a waiter in San Francisco. One person claimed that he moved to Goa and lived like a hippie using the name Jungle Barry, and they even had a picture of him. But it turned out that the man in the picture was actually a folk singer named Barry Halpin. None of the other hundreds of sightings of Lord Lucan have ever been confirmed or disproved. If Lord Lucan is still alive today, he would be 82 years old. Number 2. Bradford Bishop. On March 2, 1976, a call came into the State Park Ranger's office in Columbia, North Carolina. There was a small fire in a wooded area. A ranger went to the area and started to put out the fire. As the fire died down, the ranger was shocked to see several bodies in a shallow grave. It turned out to be 5 bodies, 2 women and 3 boys. The ranger notified the sheriff's office, and officers arrived shortly afterwards. The bodies were examined, and all the victims had died from a head injury caused by a sledgehammer. The women were wearing expensive clothes from a department store nearly 300 miles away in Bethesda, Maryland. A shovel found nearby was also purchased at a store in Bethesda. The police in Bethesda were contacted, but no one had reported 5 people missing. The identity of the people in the shallow grave remained a mystery for 6 days. Then a man in Bethesda contacted the police. He was worried because he hadn't seen his neighbors, the Bishops, in several days. An officer went to the family's home, and when he walked in, he saw blood droplets on the floor. As he walked through the house, several rooms were splattered with blood. The police concluded that the bodies in the shallow grave were 37-year-old Annette Bishop, her sons William 14, Brenton 10, and Jeffrey 5, and her mother-in-law 68-year-old Lobelia Bishop. The only family member missing was 39-year-old Bradford Bishop, who was Lobelia's son, Annette's husband, and father to all 3 children. The family's dog was also missing. At first, the police thought that Bradford might also be a victim, so they started to retrace the last day that the family was seen alive, which was March 1st, the day before the bodies were found. When they did, they realized that Bradford wasn't a victim. Bradford had a degree in history from Yale and a master's in art from the University of California. After school, he joined the State Department. At the time of the murders, he was the Assistant Chief, Division of Special Activities and Commercial Treaties. On the day of the murders, Bradford learned that he was again passed out for a promotion. After he found out, he told his secretary that it felt like he was coming down with the flu. He got into his car and drove to a nearby mall. He purchased a short-handled sledgehammer, a shovel, and a gas can. The police think that he arrived home after 8 o'clock when his sons were in bed. He most likely attacked his wife first. There was a book beside a pool of blood, so they think that she was reading when she was struck. Bradford then killed his mother after she returned home from walking the dog. He then went to his sons' rooms and beat all 3 of them to death. He loaded the bodies into the family station wagon and then drove nearly 5 hours to Columbia. Once there, he dug a hole about the size of a bathtub and put the bodies of his family into it. He doused them in gasoline and set them on fire. The police announced that they were looking for Bradford, and a witness came forward. On the afternoon that the bodies were found, Bradford had purchased a pair of shoes in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and he used his credit card. 2.5 weeks after the murder, on March 18th, the family station wagon was found 500 miles away from the shallow grave in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. The car had bloodstains in it. As for what happened to Bradford and the family dog is still a mystery. One theory is that he killed himself, and his body is somewhere in the park. Another theory is that he fled to Europe. Before he disappeared, Bradford traveled throughout Europe, and he spent time there during World War II. Bradford also spoke 5 different languages fluently. Besides English, he spoke French, Serbio-Croatian, Italian, and Spanish. This would have made it easier for him to blend in Europe. There have also been several sightings of him in Belgium, England, Finland, the Netherlands, Germany, Greece, Italy, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland. A third theory is that Bradford was a spy and he killed his family because they knew too much or his cover was blown. However, both the State Department and the CIA have denied that Bradford was a spy. Another possibility is that he killed his family and defected to the Soviet Union, but the police say that seems unlikely. Then, in 2014, a very promising lead popped up. The police in Scottsboro, Alabama, found a picture of a John Doe who was killed in a hit-and-run accident in 1981 in Scottsboro. Someone noticed that the picture looked a lot like Bradford, who had been added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list in April 2014. The John Doe was exhumed, and his DNA was compared to Bradford's. It was determined that it was not a match, and the identity of the John Doe is a mystery to this day. What happened to Bradford Bishop is also unknown. The police say that thanks to his skill with languages, he could be living anywhere in the world. If he is alive today, he would be 81 years old. Number 1. Charles Rogers. June 23, 1965 was a hot and sunny day in Houston, Texas. The police were called to a home in the Montrose neighborhood because the nephew of the Rogers, who were an elderly couple, had become worried after not hearing from them for a few days. 2 officers went to the home, and nothing seemed disturbed. One thing that they did notice was the distinctive smell of bleach. For unknown reasons, one of the officers opened an old ice box in the kitchen. He saw some cuts of meat that were cleaned, but unwrapped. He originally thought that it was either pork or possibly dog meat. Then he looked down and he saw 2 heads in the vegetable crisper facing up towards him. The officer quickly realized that the meat inside the icebox was human. The bodies were the homeowners, 81-year-old Fred Rogers and his 79-year-old wife, Edwina. Roger had been beaten to death with a claw hammer. His eyes were gouged out and his genitals were missing. Edwina had been shot execution style. Both of them had their organs removed. The organs were cut up and then flushed down the toilet. The bodies had been dissected with a knife and a keyhole saw. The authorities believe that the couple was killed on Father's Day, which was 3 days before their remains were found. What the police really found odd is that 2 people were murdered, they were drained of blood and dismembered in the house, yet they found very little blood. Some blood was found in the upstairs washroom, where the bodies were most likely dismembered, and in the kitchen, where some of the remains were found. They also found blood leading to a locked room on the 2nd floor. The police got inside the room and realized it was the bedroom of the couple's 44-year-old son, Charles Rogers. Charles wasn't in the room, and it's unclear where he went. The police interviewed neighbors of the Rogers. Many of them, who had lived near the family for several years, had no idea that the couple even had a son, and they certainly didn't know that he lived with them. Apparently, his parents didn't see much of him either. He would get up early in the morning before his parents were awake, and he returned late at night when they were in bed. Where he went during the day is unknown. Charles had worked as a seismologist, but he suddenly quit his job 8 years before the murders without giving a reason. When he was at home, he stayed locked up in his room and he cooked food on his hot plate. If he wanted to communicate with his parents, he would slide notes under the door. A massive search was launched, but not only did they not have a current photo of Charles, no one had seen him in years, so they couldn't even get a current description of him. Where he went is still a mystery, but he was declared dead in absentia in 1975. A book published in 1992 said that Charles was actually a CIA agent, and he was involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which happened a year and a half before the murders. His parents supposedly found out about his involvement, so he killed them. Another book, released in 2003, said that Rogers was horribly abused by his parents, so he killed them. After killing them, he fled to Mexico. Once there, he was able to go into hiding because he was a gifted geologist, and his skills would have been valued by people in the mining and oil industries. The owners of the companies kept him hidden in exchange for working for them. Charles was apparently murdered himself sometime later in Honduras. A mining deal went sour, and Charles was killed with a pickaxe. However, these are only theories, and what happened to Charles Rogers is still a mystery. He is the only suspect in the murders of his parents, which has become known as the Icebox murders. Since he's never been found, the murders are considered officially unresolved. Number 3. Glenn Stewart Godwin. Glenn Stewart Godwin was born in June 1958 in Miami, Florida. Glenn was a law-abiding citizen for the early part of his life, but that all changed in the summer of 1980. At the time, he was living in Palm Springs, California, working several menial jobs like being a mechanic, a construction worker, and a tool salesman. Then he hatched a plan to rob his friend, 26-year-old Kim Robert LaValle. LaValle was a pilot who transported marijuana into the United States from Mexico. Glenn was annoyed that LaValle made what he considered easy money. Glenn worked 3 jobs, and he was $25,000 in debt. He also owed LaValle $7,000. Nevertheless, Glenn convinced LaValle they should buy a condo together. On August 1st, 1980, Glenn told LaValle to come over to the apartment that he shared with 31-year-old Frank Soto. He told LaValle to bring over the money for the down payment on the condo. Soto claims that just a few hours before LaValle arrived, Glenn told him that he was going to rob LaValle and then throw him out of the apartment. Soto said Glenn would give him a signal and then he was supposed to restrain LaValle. But when the time came to do that, Soto didn't move. Glenn and LaValle ended up going out to play tennis. They returned to the apartment at about 11 p.m. Once they were back, LaValle told Glenn he needed to pay the $7,000 back quicker. Then Glenn signaled for Soto to grab LaValle. Soto said that he held LaValle's arms behind his back, and then Glenn started punching him in the face. LaValle fell to the floor, and Glenn stomped on his head and chest. Glenn then got a towel and tried to strangle LaValle, but the towel ripped. So Glenn went into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. He then started stabbing LaValle, and he kept doing it until LaValle stopped moving. Glenn ended up stabbing him 28 times. Glenn then asked his former roommate, 35-year-old Roy Dickey, to come over. When Dickey entered the apartment, Glenn pointed a gun at him. Glenn told Dickey that he needed help getting rid of the body or he would kill Dickey's girlfriend and his 5 children. So Dickey reluctantly agreed to help. They all loaded LaValle's body into LaValle's truck, and then Dickey drove to the Chocolate Mountains Aerial Gunnery Range southwest of Desert Center, California. Dickey made a bomb using fuel oil, nitrogen fertilizer, and dynamite. Then he blew up the truck with LaValle's body inside of it. 2 days later, some people found the remains of the truck at LaValle. A few days after that, the police identified the remains as Kim LaValle. The police investigation into the murder eventually led them to Glenn, Soto, and Dickey. They were all arrested in March 1980. Glenn went to trial first, and the star witnesses against him were Soto and Dickey. They both testified that Glenn was the mastermind behind the murder. Dickey had made a plea deal. He would eventually plead guilty to being an accessory to murder. He would be sentenced to 2 years in prison. He would end up serving 16 months. Soto agreed to testify against Glenn, even though he wasn't given a plea deal. Soto said he was testifying because he thought that Glenn was the most dangerous person he knew. Glenn testified on his own behalf, and he claimed he would never kill anyone. He said that Dickey and Soto killed LaValle and framed him. He said that on the night of the murder, he was out all night with a woman. However, the woman he claimed to be with didn't testify. Glenn's trial lasted 3 weeks, and the jury deliberated for 3 days. He was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 26 years to life in prison. Frank Soto was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life. After Glenn was sentenced, he was incarcerated at the Dual Vocational Institution in Tracy, California. In early 1987, Glenn attempted to escape, but he was caught. He was transferred to Folsom State Maximum Security Prison in Folsom, California. Folsom is an incredibly secure prison. It had been open for 105 years when Glenn was transferred there, and only 2 people had escaped. Not long after arriving there, Glenn set to work being the 3rd person to escape. He started by paying another inmate who changed his work designation. This got Glenn assigned to work as a gardener in an older section of the prison which had less supervision. He should not have been allowed in that area because of his prior escape attempt. On June 5, 1987, prison officials realized that 28-year-old Glenn Stewart Godwin was missing. They discovered that he got into a storm drain and he made his way to the American River. There was a raft waiting for him and he rowed to shore. He then got into a car and vanished. Obviously, Glenn had help from the outside. It turned out that some tools, like a hacksaw, had been smuggled into the prison. The authorities concluded that Glenn's wife, Shelley Rose Godwin, and his former cellmate at Dual, Lawrence Carlick, helped him escape. Carlick was arrested 3 days after the prison break. Glenn and Shelley were labeled fugitives. Glenn had only served about 6 years of his sentence of 26 years to life. After Glenn escaped, he made his way to Mexico. He got work as a cocaine trafficker. In 1989, the American authorities learned that he was doing a 7-year sentence in prison in Jalisco, Mexico for trafficking. In February 1990, Glenn's wife, Shelley Godwin, was arrested in Dallas, Texas. At the time, she was 5 months pregnant. The American authorities wanted Glenn to be extradited, but there was a delay. The delay was caused because Glenn had stabbed to death another inmate who was a member of a drug cartel. Glenn was finally going to be extradited to the United States in the fall of 1991. But then, on September 26, 1991, he escaped from the Mexican prison. Where he went after that is unknown. In December 1996, Glenn was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. He stayed on there until May 2016, but he wasn't taken off because he was located. He simply no longer fit their top 10 criteria. Glenn Stewart Godwin has been spotted several times since his second prison escape. The last most credible sighting of him was in California in 1997. It's believed at the time of this recording he's living in Mexico or Central America. He has used the aliases Miguel Carrera, Nigel Lopez, and Dennis Harold McWilliams. Glenn is highly intelligent. He is 6 feet tall with a medium build, green eyes, and he is approximately 170 pounds. The FBI has stated they have no reason to believe that Glenn is dead. At the time of this video, if Glenn is alive, he would be 63 years old. The FBI considers him to be armed and dangerous. Number 2. William Leslie Arnold. William Leslie Arnold was born on August 28, 1942, in Omaha, Nebraska. William, who preferred to be called Leslie, lived with his parents, William and Opal, and his brother, James, who was 3 years younger than him. On the morning of September 27, 1958, 16-year-old Leslie was on the phone with his girlfriend, Crystal. Leslie's father was at work, and his brother was working as an usher at a local rodeo. That night, Leslie and Crystal were planning on going to the drive-in. Leslie's mother, Opal, didn't think very highly of Crystal. While Leslie talked to Crystal on the phone, Opal called Crystal no good. Leslie and Opal didn't have a great relationship, and they had several heated arguments in the past. When Opal called Crystal no good, he thought that Crystal heard the comment, and another argument ensued. Leslie got so angry that he punched the wall. Opal thought that his behavior was outrageous, and she told him that he wasn't taking the car that night. Leslie threatened to hurt his mother if she kept disrespecting Crystal. Opal was sick of dealing with her 16-year-old son and ordered him to go to his room. Once Leslie was in his bedroom, he tried to come up with a plan to convince his mother to let him take the car that night. But then, when he went back to talk to his mother, they just started arguing again. Opal told Leslie to take a walk to cool off. Leslie went on a walk, but he didn't calm down. Instead, he came up with a disturbing plan. He got home at about 2:30 that afternoon, and he made his way to his parents' bedroom. He picked up his father's semi-automatic Remington rifle. He then went and confronted Opal. He told her that he was going to take the car and he was going on the date with Crystal. Despite having a rifle in his hands, Opal laughed at him. Leslie claimed he had never intended to shoot his mother, but he did just that. He shot her in the chest. He then moved closer and shot her 5 more times in the heart area. Leslie's 42-year-old father, William, happened to walk into the house not long after the shots were fired. Leslie said that his father took a swing at him and he ended up shooting his father 6 times in the abdomen. After Leslie murdered his parents, he dragged their bodies into the basement. They had bled to death on a rug, so he took the rug out to the garage. Leslie then went over and talked to his neighbor, Rose Grossman. Leslie explained that he had a senile grandfather. He said that his grandfather was traveling with his grandmother from Wyoming to California on the train, and they had gone missing. His parents had left immediately to go help with the search. Leslie asked Grossman to take care of his brother James until his parents returned, and she agreed. So when James got home, Leslie took him right over to Grossman's home. Leslie then went home because he had to get ready for his date. Leslie took Crystal out to the drive-in that night, and then he returned to the home where he had murdered his parents hours earlier. He thought that the house was eerie, and he was filled with dread. He ended up turning up the radio and sleeping with his door closed. The next morning, he went to church by himself. When he got home, he borrowed a shovel from a neighbor. That night, he dug 2 shallow graves under a lilac bush in his backyard. He then dragged the bodies of his parents up from the basement and then put them in the shallow graves and covered them with dirt. 8 days after the double murder, on October 5th, 1958, Leslie's grandparents unexpectedly showed up at his home. It was the same grandparents he had told people that they had gone missing. Leslie's grandparents were suspicious of him, but they didn't stay long. It turned out that the grandmother had phoned Rose Grossman a few days earlier to see if Opal had left any instructions regarding her grandsons. While they talked, Grossman inquired about the senile grandfather. The grandmother had no idea what Grossman was talking about. After the phone call, Grossman started investigating aspects of Leslie's story. She found out that the train that Leslie said his grandparents were on did not leave at the time he said it did. She also talked to Leslie's brother and learned that Leslie and Opal used to have violent arguments. Grossman then considered calling the police. What she didn't know was that Leslie's extended family was also thinking of calling the police, but his grandmother didn't want to jump to conclusions. On October 10th, about 2 weeks after the double murder, Rose Grossman ended up calling the police and told them what she knew. Leslie's great uncle also went to the police that day. The next day, detectives picked up Leslie at school and brought him to the police station for questioning. He quickly confessed to the murders, and then he led the detectives to the bodies. Leslie was subsequently charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. If he were to be convicted, he could have been sentenced to death. Instead, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. On June 2, 1959, just 3 months shy of his 17th birthday, Leslie Arnold was sent to the Nebraska Penitentiary in Lincoln to serve his sentence. There's a good chance that Leslie's life sentence would have been commuted and he would have eventually been paroled, but he didn't wait for that opportunity. On July 14, 1967, 8 years into his sentence, Leslie and a fellow inmate, 33-year-old James Harding, managed to escape. Harding was serving a sentence for killing a man during a robbery. Harding and Leslie weren't friends, but they both desperately wanted to get out of prison. They got a man who had recently been paroled to help them. They told him that when things were in place, to place an ad in the classified section that read, "NOF arrives," with a date that things were supposed to unfold. So when they saw the classified ad, "NOF arrived July 14th, that was their cue that a package would be arriving at the prison on July 14th, and they were to escape that night. On the morning of July 14th, the parolee threw a cardboard tube over the fence, and Harding picked it up. Inside the tube were 2 rubber masks and a hacksaw. That night, Leslie and Harding bunched up their blankets and pillows in their bed to make it look like they were in bed. Then they put the mask on the pillow to make it look like their heads. After that, they made their way to the music room. Earlier that day, they had sawed off some bars of the window and then put them back in place. The bars were held together with chewing gum. That night, they simply removed the bars and climbed out the window. They ran 30 feet to a 12-foot tall barbed wire fence and scaled it. The man who got them the hacksaw and the mask was waiting on the other side of the fence. They got into his car and they drove off into the darkness. After they escaped, Harding called a childhood friend and he agreed to help them. He bought them bus tickets to Chicago, Illinois, and gave them all the money he had. In Chicago, Harding and Leslie parted ways. Massive manhunts for both men were launched, but neither man was found in the days or weeks after the escape. In May 1968, 9 months after their escape, Harding was arrested in Los Angeles because of a stroke of bad luck. Weeks earlier, on April 4, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated by James Earl Ray. Ray wasn't arrested in the weeks after the murder. Harding had the unfortunate luck of resembling Ray. A woman saw him in the bar and thought he was Ray, so she called the authorities. Harding was arrested and sent back to Nebraska. 8 years later, his sentence was commuted and he was paroled. During that time, William Leslie Arnold remained on the lam. In fact, since he split from Harding in Chicago 54 years ago, there have been no confirmed sightings of him. In September 2017, a new piece of evidence surfaced that indicates where Leslie went after Chicago. In December 1968, 17 months after Leslie escaped, an American citizen, most likely Leslie, used the name William Leslie Arnold to register with the Brazilian government as a resident alien. Leslie used his real name, birthday, and hometown on the residence card. On the back of the card, it indicates that Interpol is looking for information on the resident because he is wanted by the FBI. The card had been stored in an archive in Sao Paulo, Brazil. A man who was fascinated with genealogy found the card on a genealogy website after he read an article about Leslie's escape. Investigators who had been tracking Leslie were not surprised to learn that he had traveled to Brazil. While in prison, he showed Harding a book that said if a foreign man impregnates a Brazilian woman in Brazil, there is an excellent chance that the Brazilian government wouldn't extradite him. It's unknown if the Brazilian authorities ever looked for Leslie. It's also unknown how long Leslie stayed in Brazil, if he left at all. He may have died there, or he may still be living in Brazil. He may have also moved on, and he could be living anywhere in the world if he's still alive. If William Leslie Arnold is alive today, he'd be 79 years old. On the left side of the screen is what Leslie may have looked like when he was in his 50s, and on the right side is what he may have looked like in 2010 when he was 66 years old. Number 1. Ismail Muslim Ali. Ronald Ishmael Labib was born in August 1947 in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands. He grew up poor and he was frustrated by the caste system in St. Croix that was based on skin color. Labib first got into trouble when he was in high school. He was training horses and he got into a fight with a white man over his horse. Labib hit the man with a rock. He ended up getting expelled from school over the incident. When Labib was 16 years old, he was arrested after he and several friends stole a car and went joyriding. Labib was given a choice of facing trial or signing up for the army. He chose to enlist in the army. He was promptly sent to Vietnam. Labib hated being in Vietnam. He sympathized with the Vietnamese and he was disturbed by the number of civilian deaths. Labib got in trouble while serving in Vietnam. He beat up a white serviceman and ended up in military prison. While incarcerated, he converted to Islam and he took on the name Ismail Muslim Ali. He was then dishonorably discharged from the army. Afterward, Ali traveled to New York City and he became involved with the Black Panthers. He stayed in New York for a while and then he traveled back to St. Croix. When Ali got back, like a lot of black men on the island, he couldn't find work. He eventually started a political group that supported independence from the United States. To support their cause, Ali and his followers sold marijuana and committed robberies. On September 6, 1972, it's believed that Ali and 4 accomplices, 23-year-old Warren Ballantyne, 21-year-old Raphael Joseph, 21-year-old Mariel Smith, and 23-year-old Beaumont Garou, went to the Fountain Valley Resort in St. Croix. They were all wearing masks and they were armed with guns. The 5 men robbed the resort's pro shop and restaurant and demanded the wallets and purses from the guests. Tragically, the robbery turned violent. 15 people ended up being shot. 8 people, 7 white guests and a black maintenance worker, died due to their injuries. The 5 men then made their getaway. Less than $1,000 was stolen. It's believed that the golf resort was targeted as a political statement. It was a symbol of racial equality because it was a place where rich white people visited and poor black people served them. The golf resort was also notable because it was owned by the Rockefeller family. The massacre shocked the people of the Virgin Islands. It also had significant effect on tourism, so police action was demanded. On September 12th, 6 days after the mass shooting, Ali was arrested. Soon, his 4 accomplices were also arrested. Ali and his accomplices had already been on the radar of the police and the FBI because of their politically motivated crimes. Once in custody, all 5 men confessed to the murders. They went to trial in July 1973. Their lawyer tried to get their confessions dismissed. The men claimed that they were tortured into confessing. Several people testified that they saw the 6 men being tortured. The police and the FBI denied that any torture took place. The trial was often disrupted by Ali's outbursts. The jury ultimately found all 5 men guilty of the 8 murders. Ali and his accomplices were all sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences and an additional 90 years. Ali served 12 years in maximum security prisons throughout mainland United States. In 1982, he filed an appeal contesting the legality of sending him to federal prisons. He also claimed he felt unsafe in those prisons. He was sent back to St. Croix to await a decision on his appeal. His appeal was unsuccessful, and he was ordered to go back to prison on the U.S. mainland. On New Year's Eve 1984, Ali was led onto a plane with 2 guards after everyone else was seated. After Ali was seated, he told the guards they had a stomachache and he needed to use the washroom. They ended up taking him to the washroom 3 times. When he emerged from the washroom after his 3rd trip, he was armed with a gun. He grabbed one of the flight attendants and made her take him to the cabin. The airplane had a system that would make a dinging noise to alert the crew and passengers. For example, a ding would indicate that the passengers could undo their seatbelts. The flight attendant did 4 dings in a row, which indicated that there was trouble in the back of the plane. One of the pilots got on the phone with the flight attendant. She relayed a message from Ali. He said that he wanted to be taken to Cuba. The pilot told him that he didn't think that there was enough fuel to make it to Cuba. Ali explained that he was serving 8 consecutive life sentences in prison, so he didn't have much to lose. The plane ultimately landed safely in Cuba. Ali then made a speech to the passengers explaining that he was a political prisoner and he was seeking asylum in Cuba. He apologized for causing any problems and he wished everyone a Happy New Year. Many of the passengers thought that for an armed hijacker, he was polite and friendly. After landing in Cuba, Ali was arrested. For stealing the plane, he was sentenced to 7 years in a Cuban prison. Ali served his sentence, and he worked as an English teacher and a translator. After that, he sold juice from a stand. He also got married and raised a family. In 2016, a documentary about Ismail Muslim Ali called The Skyjacker's Tale was released. He had sat down for an interview for the documentary. In the documentary, Ali denied committing the murders. He said that he knew how to rob a place without killing people. He also explained how he got the gun on the plane. While he was incarcerated in St. Croix, several people visited him. One of them gave him a gun. He then hid the gun near his groin. Ali knew he wouldn't go through the metal detectors when he was brought to the airport because he was wearing handcuffs. Then, when he got into the washroom for the 3rd time, he retrieved the gun. In late 2014, President Barack Obama tried to restore relations with Cuba. Then in June 2017, President Donald Trump put the brakes on any deals with Cuba until certain conditions were met. Specifically, he wanted Ali and all American fugitives living in Cuba to be extradited to the United States. In an interview with the New York Times, Ali said that Cuba wanted their sovereignty respected and they would not be bullied. So he did not think that he would be extradited. Currently, Ali appears to be correct. At the time of this recording, 74-year-old Ismail Muhammad Ali is living as a free man in Cuba. For the 8 murders, Ali spent 12 years in prison in the United States. He has spent 37 years in Cuba. He is still wanted by the FBI, and they consider him armed and dangerous. Number 3. Vernon Henry. The Henry family lived in Athol, a small city in northern Idaho. Connie Carlton and Vernon Henry got married in 1973. They moved to Athol from Nebraska in 1986. Vernon and Connie had 5 children, 2 sons and 3 daughters. Their eldest child had moved out, but their 4 other children, who ranged in age from 18 to 5, lived with them. Vernon didn't have a permanent full-time job. He occasionally operated a backhoe, and he also ran an upholstery business from his home. Connie ran a home daycare. Everyone considered the family nice and easygoing. Around 12:45 a.m. on August 12, 1996, 44-year-old Vernon and 42-year-old Connie were at home with their 4 children. Then Vernon began to argue with Connie and their 18-year-old daughter, Heather. Heather was the couple's second eldest child. She had recently graduated from high school and was a popular babysitter. Some reports say it's unknown what they were arguing about. Other articles say it was about Heather's curfew time. Regardless, Vernon grabbed his .45 caliber pistol and shot his 42-year-old wife and 18-year-old daughter. He shot them again in the head to make sure they were dead. He then grabbed a bag with his belongings and walked out the front door. He also took the murder weapon and a .44 caliber Magnum revolver. Vernon and Connie's 12-year-old son heard the argument and the gunshots. He came downstairs and found the bodies. He saw his father driving away from the home north on Highway 95 in the family's maroon 1986 Toyota Camry. The 12-year-old boy called 911, but was too late to do anything to save his 42-year-old mother, Connie, and his 18-year-old sister, Heather. The police started an immediate search for 44-year-old Vernon, but he was nowhere to be found. According to all the news reports and our research, his car wasn't found either. But on a Facebook posting from Idaho cold case made in 2017, the car was supposedly found in Washington. The police believe that Vernon may have been planning the murders for some time. They think he may have hidden some supplies and money in a wooded area. Vernon was described as a, quote, anti-government survivalist type, unquote. Vernon had connections and relatives in northern Idaho, Nebraska, and Alaska. He may have done upholstery work for cash to stay off the radar. Vernon Henry is described as 5'10", 145 pounds, with brown hair and a reddish-brown beard. Of course, that was in 1996, and in the last 29 years, his weight, hair color, and facial hair may have changed. He was featured twice on America's Most Wanted. The show received dozens of tips, but Vernon has never been located. If Vernon Henry is alive today, he is 73 years old. Writing about cases like this one can be overwhelming, and sometimes the research process requires a deeper level of focus. So Magic Mind reached out to me to try their drinks. I was curious. Within a couple days, I noticed a major improvement in my productivity. Since I was so happy with Magic Mind, I decided to have them as a sponsor so I could talk about their drinks. They have 3 different formulas: Free, Original, and Max. I tried them all during a 6-day challenge, and I really enjoyed the Original, so I've been using that for about a month now. It tastes good, and it gives me the right amount of energy and focus for the day. It also didn't give me a crash at the end of the day, so I was still helpful and productive at home after the workday. I think it's funny how my brain works, because sometimes the more I have to do, the more I'll procrastinate. Just worrying about how much work I have to do is exhausting. But after drinking Magic Mind Original, I feel less stressed and ready to tackle my tasks. That's because when adaptogens combine with nootropics, it helps with stress reduction and builds long-term resilience. I've been recommending Magic Mind to all my friends and family, but I really thought my video editor could use them because he's always complaining about brain fog. Right now is the perfect time to check out Magic Mind because they have an amazing deal. They're offering a mind-blowing 60% off your first subscription. It's their biggest discount to date. They also have no questions asked, 100% money back guarantee, so you'll have nothing to lose. We just want to say a big thank you to Magic Mind for helping us focus and getting this video done on time. And now, here's our second case. Number 2, Kevin Vermette. On July 12, 1997, 4 men, Michael Morrow, David Nunez, Mark Tevez, and Donnie Oliveira, were heading to a bachelor party in Kitimat, British Columbia, Canada. All the young men, with the exception of Nunez, were 20 years old. Nunez was 21. First, they had to meet a friend who was camping at Hirsch Creek Park. They pulled onto a dead-end road. Following behind them was 42-year-old Kevin Vermette. For several months, 2 of the young men, Donnie Oliveira and David Nunez, had been feuding with Vermette. Vermette was a handyman who lived and worked at a local motel. He did work in exchange for free lodging. Vermette was a loner who was known for his short temper. The feud between Vermette and the 2 young men stemmed from their time at the gym. Vermette didn't like the young men playing rap music at the gym. He even went off on a racist tirade about the music. After that, there were a few verbal spats between Vermette and the young men. One time it got physical. Vermette punched Oliveira, then the fight was broken up. Then one day, Vermette discovered that the tires on one of his vehicles had been slashed. The night when Vermette followed the 4 young men down the road, he was armed with a 12-gauge sawed-off shotgun. When the 4 men got out of their vehicle, Vermette opened fire on them. He fired 8 shots at them. He then calmly got back into his vehicle and drove away. People in the area heard the gunshots and they called the police. First responders arrived in the area. 20-year-old Michael Morrow, 20-year-old Mark Tevez, and 21-year-old David Nunez were all dead. 20-year-old Donnie Oliveira was alive, but he had lost 60% of his blood. He was taken to the hospital and ultimately survived his injuries. One person saw Vermette's pickup truck and told the police the license plate. The police descended on the motel where Vermette lived and they found both of Vermette's vehicles parked out front. But by the time they arrived, Vermette was gone and his room had been cleaned out. With his dog, he had walked into the brush and he was never seen again. The police believe that the murders were over the slashed tires. During their investigation, the police learned that someone other than Oliveira and Nunez had slashed the tires. The other 2 young men who were killed had never met Vermette. There were 2 massive searches for Vermette, but no trace of him was found. Vermette liked the outdoors and had survivalist training. However, it's suspected that he had help. The police believe that Vermette moved away from the area at some point. He was known to work as a carpenter, handyman, and truck driver. He also liked living in hotels and motels. He was also a loner who kept to himself. The police believe that this type of lifestyle made it easier for him to stay undetected. In 2010, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police released this age-enhanced image of him. 14 years later, in 2014, the police released another age-enhanced image of what he might look like at age 70. This suggests that the RCMP believes that Vermette is still alive. There was a $25,000 reward, but it has expired. Today, there's a $2,000 reward for information leading to his capture. At the time of this recording, Kevin Vermette is 71 years old. He's 5'9" and weighed 161 pounds when he went missing. His hair was brown and he has blue eyes. Vermette was meticulous about his hygiene, liked to keep physically fit, and did not like people invading his personal space. He has 3 tattoos. On his left arm, he has a coyote with a moon and a dagger through a rose. On his right arm, there is a cap with the word Lucky inscribed below it. It's been 28 years since Kevin Vermette committed the triple homicide and attempted murder, and the case remains unresolved. Number 1. Adam Emery. Adam Emery was born on November 13, 1962, in Rhode Island. After high school, Adam worked during the day as a carpenter and went to Rhode Island College at night. He majored in business. He also worked part-time at the college coffee house. After finishing school, he joined the Army. He had also served as a military police officer in the Rhode Island National Guard. Adam liked to work out, and he was trained in martial arts. In college, Adam began dating Elena DeRocco. They got married in 1988. In the summer of 1990, Adam was working as a customer service representative for a plastic manufacturer, and Elena was a manager at a construction company. On the night of August 21, 1990, Adam and Elena were hanging out with Elena's sister and her husband. They picked up seafood from a stand at Rocky Point, Rhode Island. They were eating in Adam's beloved 1985 Black T-Bird, which was parked in the parking lot. It was after 9 p.m., so it was dark. Suddenly, a car sideswiped them and broke the left taillight. The car then sped off. Adam put the car in reverse, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove out onto the road. That's when they came across the car that was being driven by 20-year-old Jason Bass, who had just pulled out of the same parking lot. Jason had dropped out of school when he was 16. He loved cooking and one day wanted to open a diner. However, he had only worked menial jobs. In Jason's car with him was his cousin and his friend. For 1.7 miles, Adam followed Jason and tried to get him to pull over. Then Adam pulled out in front of Jason, forcing him to stop. Elena handed Adam a military knife that they kept in the car. Adam ran to Jason's car as he was putting it in reverse. Adam reached into the car and tried to get the keys. For about a quarter mile, Jason drove in reverse with Adam hanging off the car. Adam screamed that he had a knife and ordered him to stop. Jason didn't stop, so Adam stabbed him in the left arm and then the heart. The first police officer on the scene lived nearby and heard the incident. When he arrived, Adam was calm and admitted to stabbing Jason. The officer called for an ambulance. 20-year-old Jason Bass was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. Adam and the other people in the car told the police that Jason had sideswiped the car and taken off. However, the paint that was left on Adam's car was not from Jason's vehicle, meaning someone else had hit him. Just before Jason drove out of the parking lot, another car had left, and that was the car that sideswiped Adam. Adam was offered a plea deal. He could plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter and get a sentence of 5 to 7 years of prison. However, he refused. Adam firmly believed he had acted in self-defense because Jason drove in reverse while he was hanging off the car. He had told Jason he had a knife and ordered him to stop. Since he didn't stop, he stabbed Jason. Adam Emery went to trial for murder in November 1993. His lawyer argued that he acted in self-defense. The prosecution told the jury to look at it from the point of view of Jason. Jason did not sideswipe Adam's car, so he and the people in his car didn't know why Adam was following them. Adam acted aggressively and cut them off, which forced them to stop. Then Adam came out of his car with a knife and latched on to their vehicle. Adam may have told Jason to stop, but he had no reason to. Jason was justified in trying to escape. Adam, who was a stranger to them, was a large man with a knife hanging from their car as they tried to get away from him. On November 10, 1993, which was Adam's 31st birthday, he was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was looking at a sentence of 25 years to life. Although he was found guilty of second-degree murder, he was released on bail until a formal sentencing hearing, which was to be held the following month. One thing that people noted was that Adam showed very little emotion after the verdict was read. He also never showed remorse for killing Jason Bass. Adam and his wife Elena left the courthouse together at around 3 p.m. Just before 7 p.m. that same night, the police got a report of a Toyota Camry blocking one lane of the Newport Bridge, which spans Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island. Police arrived on the scene and found that the car was still running. The police determined it was the car the Emerys had leased. In the front seat were cut-up credit cards and checks. There was also a purse with $50 and a pair of high-heeled shoes in it. In the back seat was a man's gray pinstripe suit and a woman's lavender business suit. It was the clothes they wore to court. They also found a receipt from a sports store totaling $205. The purchase was made within an hour of the Emerys leaving the courthouse. They purchased 2 black hooded sweatshirts, athletic socks, 2 pairs of 10-pound ankle weights, 10-pound wrist weights, and 20-pound waist weights. There was also a receipt from Burger King for food purchased at 4:15 p.m. The obvious conclusion was that the couple jumped. The police searched the bay for 6 days. Then the Emerys' relatives hired divers to do a 3-day search. No trace of them was found. As the police began to investigate, they believed it was an elaborate hoax perpetrated by the couple so they could go on the run. The police retraced the couple's last hours before they disappeared. A local news station had recorded Elena after the verdict was read. It didn't record the sound, but Elena is seen saying something to Adam. The police had a woman who could read lips review the tape. She said that Elena told Adam, quote, "We will do what we originally said. You promised me. We should have done this before," unquote. It was a cryptic statement that only proved they had something planned. The police talked to the clerk at the sporting goods store who sold them the sweatshirts and weights. He said that they seemed determined and knew what they were buying. But Adam was bothered by how much everything cost. The police thought that this was odd. Money would have been important if they were planning on going on the run. Then they went to Burger King for dinner. The police thought that this was an odd choice for a last meal. The police ultimately concluded that Adam and Elena Emery were alive and Adam was considered a fugitive. In August 1994, about 10 months after the couple went missing, some leg bones were found in a fisherman's net in Narragansett Bay. One of the bones had material that was similar to the socks the couple bought. Then a week later, a skull was found in some commercial fishing net. An expert determined it was Elena's skull. Then DNA confirmed that the leg bones belonged to Elena. So Elena was pronounced dead. However, Adam was considered a wanted fugitive. There was no evidence that he was dead. However, in 2004, Adam Emery was legally declared dead. But then, 6 years later, in 2010, the FBI did something surprising. They added Adam Emery to their wanted list. The police stated that they believe Adam is alive and he is possibly hiding in Florida or Italy, where he had family connections. As of 2020, the FBI said they are still following up on leads and tips regarding Adam's whereabouts. However, he has never been found. If Adam Emery is still alive, he would be 62 years old. When Adam Emery went missing, he was 6'1" and weighed 175 pounds. He had brown hair and blue eyes. The FBI considers him armed and dangerous.